Hello, everybody. This is Jonathan Lack, host of the Weekly Stuff podcast. And before Sean Chapman and I started doing this show regularly in 2012, we actually had a different podcast called The Monthly 10, which was an extension of my blog at the Denver Post's Your Hub at the time. Now, this was way back when we were still in high school, and we're still very much learning the ropes of podcasting and, life. These episodes are not available online anymore, and as long as I am alive, most of them will not be. But there are a couple that connect to various topics we've covered over the years, like Doctor Who, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ones we've even referenced a couple of times on the show, especially in Doctor Who conversations. And I am taking those episodes out of the vault, dusting them off, and presenting them here on our YouTube channel to fill out and complete some of our playlists. The audio quality isn't great. The people you're about to listen to are not experts about anything at all, but it might be worth some fun. You'll see. This is the Weekly Stuff from the Vault.
Hello and welcome to the Monthly 10 podcast for April 2011, Part 3. This is our final part of our three-part discussion of Doctor Who here on the Monthly 10, because today, as you're hearing this, the Series 6 premiere has just happened, which is what we've been celebrating this entire month, and that's something we are very excited about, aren't we, Sean?
Oh, yes, indeed.
In fact, we're recording this podcast. You're going to hear it on Sunday, the 23rd, actually the 24th, but we're recording it on today, which is Saturday, the 23rd, and this is the day Series 6 is officially premiering. Sean and I are recording the first part of this discussion before we watch the episode, where it's about 5 o'clock right now. It's going to start at 7 on BBC America, so we're very excited for that, right, Sean?
Yes, we are.
So,
obviously.
I mean, yes, this is how we've been passing time in our excitement for it, is recording a bunch of podcasts.
Yep.
It's worked pretty well.
I think so.
Yep. So in a few hours that'll start. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about all the new Doctors, the revived series, everything before we get to that. And then we're going to take a quick break with the podcast. You really won't hear a pause or anything. But then we will come back after we see the episode. We're going to talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes, discuss the episode. And then Sean will be leaving, and I will be writing my review of the episode, which will be going up on Your Hub before midnight sometime. So probably around 10 o'clock. So look for that. Of course, this is coming on Sunday, so you will have already seen it.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd ask me
This
to look for
this
it.
is this is like a Stephen Moffat episode of Doctor Who. Time just doesn't make sense.
No, it's just you're an idiot. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
I can
That's
tell.
why I'm here.
Okay, that's good. What are we here to talk about today?
I forgot.
Actually, Sean, we're here to talk about the revived series of Doctor Who today.
No, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Right, that began in 2005. It's a new surge of popularity for the series. But before we get to that, we have some very sad news to report. You've probably heard this already, but we figured we're talking about Doctor Who this month. We probably should discuss this on the podcast. Sean, what happened this week?
Well, sadly, Elizabeth Sladen, who played the longtime companion Sarah Jane Smith, passed away.
Yes, she was 63 years old. She passed away of cancer. She did a really good job, her and her publicist, keeping that secret. So it was very much a surprise to the Doctor Who and news community as a whole that she passed away. So, I mean, this is sad news. It's like, especially, Nicholas Courtney, who played the Brigadier, died a few months ago.
Yeah.
And Sarah Jane also. And those two, probably besides, the Doctor himself, did so much to define the classic series, and they are so iconic. So it does feel like parts of the classic series are going away.
Yeah.
But, more than that, Elizabeth Sladen, obviously, great actress. I hear a very nice person. You hear when people interviewed her, just, one of the nicest women actresses out there. And so it's a sad passing. And she also, obviously, in the revived series in the last decade, has done a lot to introduce a new generation of fans to the show through the Sarah Jane Adventures, which was kind of like, if Torchwood was Doctor Who for adults, Sarah Jane Adventures was Doctor Who for little kids.
Yeah.
So, obviously, that series is over now, but she actually got to interact with both the 10th and 11th Doctors on the show.
Yeah.
Which means, I think that's like how many Doctors is that she's interacted with now, then?
Well, then she was the third Doctor's companion, the fourth Doctor's companion. She technically was with the second and fifth in the Five Doctors crossover. I don't know if you want to count them. But then, if you don't count that crossover, then it would be four Doctors.
Right. I mean, either way, though, that's a lot. Obviously, very important to the series. It's sad news to report, but yeah. So we'll cheer you up now with discussion of a very cheery fellow, Christopher Eccleston, as we begin our discussion of the 2005 revived series of Doctor Who. But before we get into that, let's do a little quick history of how the revived series came about. We talked last time about the TV movie starring Paul McGann that came out in 1996.
Yep.
Sean, brief recap of what that was created for.
Well, okay, so basically, once again, Doctor Who had been off the air in Britain for a very long time, and it got marketed over to America, and Fox basically said, okay, we'll take this, we'll make a TV movie out of it, basically as a backdoor pilot, and if it gets enough ratings and gets enough hype, then we'll make a show out of it. It didn't do that well in the States, did actually okay in Britain, but the show never got picked up from that.
Right. But that did start a discussion in Britain, not in America. America threw it aside. But in England, it did start a discussion of what Doctor Who was at this point and how maybe they could bring it back. And so a lot of people had pitches for it. But the most significant one was a guy named Russell T. Davies, lifelong fan of the show, who credits, he says, Robert Holmes, famous Doctor Who writer we've talked about a lot on this podcast, was his childhood hero. And really, Doctor Who was the thing that got him into writing. He'd already written a few shows for the BBC at that point, but this was the late 90s, and so he had a pitch for the show that was all about, bringing it into the 2000s and modernizing it without disrespecting continuity and just making it a continuation rather than a reboot or a reimagining. And so, the key sort of tenets of that were that instead of a serialized format with 2 25-minute episodes a week, you would have a standard 13-episode series of 45-minute episodes that would air once a week. So basically, like every other drama on TV, it would be like that same format. You would set most of the stories on Earth, sort of like the Third Doctor unit stories, in order to make it more accessible to new viewers. And the idea of the Time War, which would get rid of the Time Lords, so that the Doctor would be sort of alone at the beginning of the series. And that would make it very easy for people who didn't know the whole mythology of Doctor Who to catch on to it at an early date. And so those were sort of the basic ideas of the show that Russell T. Davies presented. And it, as anything with the BBC, as it is a government organization, it took a long time for sort of these things to get worked out. But finally, and I think it was 2003, they gave them the go-ahead to start work on this. And so in 2005, a few years later, it came back to TV with the first revived series, starring a man named Christopher Eccleston as the 9th Doctor. So let's talk a little bit about Christopher Eccleston. Another absolutely wonderful Doctor, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. I think he's a very different take on the Doctor, and yet somehow he is just the same as all the other ones. And I think what he brought to the forefront was this new concept with the Time War that, as you said, generated kind of like a new starting point for continuity for new people coming in, and sort of like an interesting thing for viewers of the old show to latch onto now, too.
Well, it definitely created that, you have the classic series and the revived, and showed that stuff did happen in between that. You weren't just picking up the next day. This was years later, and the Doctor had been through a lot since last we saw him.
Yeah, and so Christopher Eccleston kind of brings a physicality to the role. He's almost kind of like Daniel Craig's James Bond in a way.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison, actually. Because he is a rougher form of the Doctor. Even his clothes represent that. He's really the first Doctor to underdress, if anything, and that he basically wears a leather jacket as kind of his trademark.
Yeah.
But it looks really cool, and I would say, without a doubt, the biggest reason why the Revived series worked at the beginning, and why, certainly I started with the Revived series, and why it worked for me and drew me in, is Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah.
If it weren't for him, this series would have tanked right off the beginning, because he really makes it work, even when, at the very beginning, the writing isn't quite there yet. But he's right there, and that's what matters. And the writing catches up to him very quickly, and after that, I mean, it's working on all cylinders pretty much.
Yeah, that is one of the things with Christopher Eccleston's performance, is that he was able to carry bad writing very well. It's something interesting that not a lot of Doctors have been able to do that as well as Christopher Eccleston has.
Yeah, but like we said, there's a darker streak to him, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. Because the episode we picked is all about that dark streak within him. And that's probably the most compelling part of his Doctor. But like the rest of them, he is a very jovial kind of person. He he has a curiosity and love for life and a vivacity for all that that's very intriguing and just really compelling to watch. And I think he has probably the greatest smile in all of space and time.
Well, he and Tom Baker kind of in
Yes.
competition for that, I think.
It's just, I think the way he uses that smile is just really charming, and it really makes his Doctor a lovable character. But at the same time, when they bring in the darker streak to him, because he has literally just pulled the trigger on his entire species, you see that lightness to him is probably just a facade in many cases. Because he's trying to work through this probably in a less healthy way than he probably should be. And that's why when we come in to the series, he's been traveling alone, it looks like, for a long time. And traveling with someone else is what's going to get him out of the rut he's in, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And that's what's really interesting, because this is what starts to force him through working through his sort of issues from the Time War. And that's why I think the first series of the revived show is so compelling, because Christopher Eccleston was only there for the 1 year, but he has a really cool arc.
Yeah, I think, and that is definitely one of the things about his series, the first series of the revived show, is that it definitely has, the Doctor has the defined character arc throughout that entire season.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what made the show work from the beginning, is that the Doctor as a character does change. He goes from very gruff, very angry, to becoming more how the Doctor was in the past.
Right, and so when he regenerates, it does feel like a moment of fulfillment rather than just someone pulled the trigger on him and he's dead now. It's the end of his arc. And when we meet the next Doctor, who we'll talk about later, you can see why that Doctor follows the Ninth Doctor. There's a very seamless transition between them. And we actually know now, this wasn't known at the time, but the next Doctor, David Tennant, was cast at the same time as Christopher Eccleston to be his replacement, because Eccleston only wanted to be around for a year. And so the Ninth and Tenth Doctors sort of have their own arcs and then kind of share this big arc, because they do transition seamlessly into each other. But that's one of the coolest things about him. He's just a great Doctor, and I think more than anything, we picked the episode we picked because it is his single best showcase.
Yeah.
And it is the episode Dalek by Robert Shearman. This was the 6th episode of Series 1 of the revived series, and it is just an incredibly compelling hour. This is where the show, I should back up here. I started watching Doctor Who with the revived series. I had been hearing about it for a long time, and I think why I got into Doctor Who was I'd heard about how there was a bunch of change-up going in the show. This was 2009 when I started hearing about it, because David Tennant was leaving, Russell T Davies was leaving, and Stephen Moffat was taking over with a new Doctor named Matt Smith. So Doctor Who was in the news a lot for all these things that were going to be happening soon with the show. And so I thought, well, it's got time travel and space travel and all these other things I love, sci-fi. I should probably watch Doctor Who. That'd be fun. But then I looked, I'm like, oh, there are 700 episodes. But wait, they started a new series in 2005. I'm going to start there.
And that's the difference between us.
Yes. So
I couldn't do that.
No. One day I will probably do what Sean did, but I'm going to have a lot of time.
No, not one day. Like one year, maybe one decade.
No, I will start on that one day. But yes.
I don't think you can do it in one day unless you're time traveling.
Yes. So I started with the revived series, and it is, I would recommend, unless you are a massive completionist and already know you like Doctor Who, this is the best place to start with the series if you've never tried it before.
Yeah.
I think starting with Series 1 of the revived series, it's very accessible to new viewers. It's got tons of shout-outs to the classic mythology of the show, and definitely classic fans can come in and feel like they're watching the next part of the story, but at the same time, it is a new part of the story, and it works really well. But the first few episodes of the series, it's definitely, and this is fine, because all shows should have this, where it's trying to find itself and what exactly it's going to do, and Dalek, the episode by Robert Shearman that we picked for the best of Eccleston's run, is the episode where the show really finds itself. And the plot of this episode is that the Doctor and his companion, Rose Tyler, who we will probably talk about in a little bit,
we'll have
they land, they're going to this museum that the Doctor has found. It's a museum of space artifacts on Earth that is underground. And so they see all of these sort of things that the Doctor has encountered before or he knows about, and he's very fascinated by all this in classic Doctor fashion.
Yeah, classic Cyberman helmet, I remember.
That is a very cool shout-out, because, and for new viewers, I didn't know what that was, and he makes some joke about it. I was like, oh, that's kind of funny, but I imagine for you having seen it, that was funny.
That made me happy when I saw that.
Yeah.
And then I got angry later on about Cyberman stuff, but we'll probably talk about that.
Yes, we'll work that in there somewhere. Anyway, so in this museum, though, they're captured because there's this man who runs the museum, and you remember his name?
Van Staten.
Harry Van Staten. He's this very rich, wealthy tycoon who actually owns the internet, is what he says.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a great joke, especially in 2005. That would have been particularly funny, the idea of owning the internet. And so he does, and he's the richest man on the earth because of it. And his hobby is collecting alien artifacts, and he's collected them all in this museum, and he has this big collection, and he intends basically to add the Doctor to his collection because he finds out, he locks the Doctor up and scans him and finds out the Doctor has 2 hearts. Mm-hmm. And so he's sort of torturing the Doctor through this, but then they find out, and this is the big revelation, he's also found a Dalek. This one Dalek, it's not really alive, it's kind of half alive, but they're torturing it to try to get it to talk, and it won't talk to them. But Stanton knows it's an alien, and so he's very fascinated by it. It landed on Earth a few years ago in the timeline where they are. I think the episode happens in something like 2020.
Yeah, something
it's a little,
like that.
It's a little bit in the future. Yeah. And so they find this Dalek, and the Doctor, of course, is enraged to see that there's a Dalek here, because he just, as we know, has gone through the Time War, which was a war between the Time Lords and the Daleks. And the Doctor, in order to wipe out the Daleks, also wiped out the Time Lord. He made the sort of unilateral decision to wipe out both species and end the war before it went any further. So he thinks all the Daleks are dead. And so seeing one at this time in his life is about the worst thing that could happen to him.
Yeah.
So you take it from here.
Yeah, so, Eccleston kind of goes batshit insane because he doesn't know that what Van Staten has yet is a Dalek. He just knows that Van Staten has something that he's torturing it. And so Van Staten puts him in the room with the Dalek so that the Doctor can talk to it. And then when the Doctor, the lights come on, the Doctor sees what it is, he just goes fucking nuts.
Yes, and it is a great scene. And the best scenes in this episode are the ones between the Doctor and the Dalek when he's talking to it. And huge credit to Eccleston here. I assume the Dalek voice was dubbed in later, so he's acting alone apart from just a hunk of metal. Mm-hmm. And just basically this big prop, and yet it really feels like he is acting with a character there, another Dalek, and he does such a great job at illustrating the Doctor's rage at this, because he is just so mad that this Dalek is here. And the Dalek is actually trying to get sort of mercy out of the Doctor, or some sort of help.
Yeah.
And the Doctor is just enraged, because he, in his mind, and this is pretty much true, there is no redeeming factor to a Dalek. They are just the lowest scum of the Universal Society. All they want to do is kill. And they stand against everything he stands for, and he's very angry to see this Dalek. But then Rose does something stupid.
Yeah, incredibly stupid. Kind of a trademark of Rose. But basically, she goes in to the room with the Dalek, puts her hand on it, then some leftover Artron energy from her time traveling. It basically reactivates the Dalek along with some of her DNA.
Yes.
So
we should back up, though. Why she does this is the Dalek, his attempt for sympathy does work with Rose, because Rose has never seen a Dalek. She's also never seen this side of the Doctor before, really, this really angry side of him. She does not know about the Time War. I think when the Dalek, she did. The Doctor
but
told her.
She doesn't know a lot of it. She doesn't really know that much about it. Just basically that it happened.
And that the Doctor lost his species.
Yeah.
So, at this point in the show, Rose becomes sort of a very grating companion. At this point, she's still okay, I think. And you can sort of understand why she touches the Dalek, because she wouldn't know that touching it would reactivate it. So I think we can forgive her for that move.
Maybe. Kind of.
Okay. Sean really hates Rose.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, because I'm sure it's going to be an interesting discussion.
I'm sure it will be.
Okay, so the Dalek escapes because it's fully powered and alive again, and this is what makes this episode so cool, is that usually, even in the classic series, correct me if I'm wrong, you see Daleks in mass droves.
Well, not in the classic series, not in mass droves. They're usually
in a group. That's all.
Yeah, there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 Daleks.
Yeah. I know there's not fleets like you see in the new one.
Yeah, that would be pretty impressive if they could do that.
Right. But comparative to what the classic series was able to achieve, bigger units.
Yeah.
And so here it's just one Dalek that until recently was near death. And it just rains hell upon this facility, and it is a really scary episode, because this Dalek is just going crazy on this facility, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And for me, this was my first exposure to a Dalek, and I can't imagine a better introduction to how good this a villain is. That the Dalek is, there's just one of it, and it is killing everyone in that facility, and there's nothing they can do to stop it, and it's so intimidating. And the voice work on the Dalek in this one is just so well done. and the way it moves and everything. And it's really cool. And so the Dalek is a very scary villain in this episode, and the Doctor is basically like, again, we've used this term before, is kind of playing a big chess match with the Dalek. He doesn't go out and fight the Dalek.
Yeah.
He's trying to stop it remotely. And so it's all this strategy that he and the Dalek are going into this, battle of wits together to stop each other. And the Dalek is trying to get out of the facility and probably kill everyone on Earth after that point.
Yeah, and coming from like a classic series perspective, I think what the episode Dalek did for the Daleks is it brought back what made the Daleks scary in the first place. It's almost kind of a revamp. They look the same, but they act slightly different. And it's also kind of interesting because it's kind of like this is a more advanced Dalek than you're used to seeing, because this is a Dalek from after the Time War. So he's more capable than other Daleks. Like, Daleks and humans have fought before, and humans have defeated the Daleks on a few occasions in the past. I think timey-wimey stuff got rid of that in the continuity, but so basically in the past the humans would have been able to actually fight against the Dalek. Here, not at all. It has basically some sort of force field that destroys bullets. Its bonded polycarbide armor is basically impenetrable,
right?
And just zaps people.
And what's great about the writing is it does make perfect sense, and that's something that the Time War allows for, is these new continuity things where it does make sense, because obviously the Daleks would have upgraded for a war scenario.
Yeah.
So basically, though, what it boils down to is that this is the last surviving Dalek of the Time War, and the Doctor is the last surviving Time Lord of the Time War, which means they are basically the two most dangerous beings in the universe, and they're together in one facility, and they hate each other. And it's just a really fascinating character study on both of them, because the Dalek actually has a very interesting character arc in this episode. And I don't think you could ever say that about a Dalek in other stories.
Well, although interesting point is that most of the Dalek stuff, at least in this episode, is based a lot on a Big Finish audio story called Jubilee that came out in like 2003, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So like in that kind of like stuff that the Dalek goes through about being the only Dalek, that's all taken from that audio play that I'm pretty sure was written by Robert Shearman. So.
Yes. So it's just really cool to see how the Doctor, by the end of the episode, actually does feel a little bit of sympathy for the Dalek. The last scene of the episode, where Rose does get to see the kind of terror she's sort of unleashed, but also how pathetic the Dalek is without its shell and without its powers, is a really powerful scene. And it's just, again, great work by Eccleston, great work by everyone involved in bringing the Dalek to life in this episode, great special effects work. It's just a tremendous story, and I don't know if there's much more to say about it, but, the Dalek... we should say, the Revived series is very well known for overusing the Daleks really badly in the later years, and this is by far the best Dalek story the Revived series has yet told, and it's because the scale, this is just a less is more situation. Every time you see the Daleks after this, except maybe in the Matt Smith Dalek episode, there's a mass, this is where I'm talking about mass droves, there's hordes and fleets of Daleks, and that's not scary. You could have hordes and fleets of anything, and they would be powerful because of the numbers. When it's one Dalek and it can do this much, that's what makes it scary to me. And so that's why I've kind of come to like some of the other Dalek episodes in the Revived series. But when I was watching it through the first time as a viewer, I was thinking, why are they doing stories with this many Daleks? It was so much cooler when they had just one. And also it totally undermines the drama of this episode that there's only one Dalek left, but we can overlook that.
Yeah. The Revive series definitely goes a little Dalek crazy. Like I thought it was fine when they brought the Daleks in as for the series finale for Christopher Eccleston. I thought that was a really good
full circle.
Yeah, it was a full circle thing with the Doctor coming to terms with the Time War.
Yeah.
And then they brought them back again and again and again and again and again.
Yes. And each time they are defeated through a crazy Deus Ex Machina that is absolutely laughable.
Do we want to talk about the one from this series, the Deus Ex Machina?
Although I like this Deus Ex Machina because, we'll go into it. So, in the series finale this year, which is called, I do not remember the name of the series.
I think it's The Parting of the Ways.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it. It's 2 parts. But
The Parting of the, that's how I remember it. Parting of the Ways is the last one.
Right. So, in the episode The Parting of the Ways, basically they're in Earth's future 26th century, I think.
And, Satellite 5.
Right, Satellite 5, 26th century, and the Daleks have sort of taken over the Earth remotely. No one knows the Daleks are in charge, what they are, and they're basically using humans to harvest and create new Daleks, which I'm fine with that. There's ways later in the series where the Daleks come back that is just really ridiculous. This makes sense because it's been happening for like centuries. They've been planning this.
Yeah.
And especially because the first Dalek story in this series happened, 500 years before this. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
The Daleks have come back. They've got a new Emperor Dalek, and the Doctor he's going on a kamikaze mission to defeat the Daleks. He is going to kill all of them, and he's going to kill himself. And you can tell, Eccleston plays it so well. His plan, he wants to die. He's like, I am going to finish this, and then I can finally die in peace. And he doesn't want to live anymore, I don't think. He is done. He's going to defeat the Daleks. He sent Rose back to the past, her past, and locked her there with the TARDIS so that so Rose is safe. He has no temptations to flee. He is going to kill himself, and he's going to kill all the Daleks. And it's going to wipe out humanity, too. So he's going to do what he did in the Time War again, but he can justify it by saying that it's all going to be over now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably the scariest Eccleston ever gets, is that he's kind of gone insane in this episode. But what happens is Rose, in the past, and there are some missteps in the way they tell this story, but overall I like it. It's basically showing that her loyalty to the Doctor is such that what she does is, in the two episodes before this, called Boomtown, that's the title of the episode, they had to turn this Slitheen creature, they bring it onto the TARDIS, and the Slitheen looks into the heart of the TARDIS, and it changes it. And so Rose has this idea, if she can activate the heart of the TARDIS, it will allow her to travel back into the future, because she doesn't know how to work the TARDIS, but if she can open that, she can get back to the Doctor and try to save him and talk some sense into him, because obviously the Doctor needs someone to tell him that what he's doing probably is not good. And so she ends up opening the time vortex and sort of absorbing all the time energy. She goes into the future, and she uses the time vortex to wipe the Daleks out of existence. It's pretty cool. It's definitely a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, no.
But they seeded it before, and I'm more or less okay with that, because they did explain that the time vortex is powerful. It's not like this was just happened and there was no explanation for it. They'd seeded it a little bit. But the main thing is just that I think, and again, there are some missteps in the writing and the performance of Rose in this episode, but overall I do like that theme that she comes back to save the Doctor and does that much. And I think the Ninth Doctor is so moved by this that it really does allow him to come to terms with everything that's happened. And, at this point, Rose and the Doctor do end up kind of falling in love, which we'll have plenty to say about. But at this point, it's still completely platonic on his side. He's not in love with her.
Yeah, no.
But he's the value of this friendship has changed him so much that he is able to come to peace. And so he's also perfectly willing to sacrifice himself to save her. He kisses her. It's not a romantic kiss. It's to suck the time energy out of her. Yeah. And then he absorbs it all, and that causes him to regenerate. And it's one of my favorite regeneration scenes. I really love it, because it just shows how content he is.
You've only seen 3 regeneration scenes.
I've watched some online out of context, which totally does not count.
Okay. I was just going to say, it's like, okay.
That's actually a completely invalid statement, because I love all the regeneration scenes I've seen. They're all really wonderful. Except the one in the movie, that's shit. But that doesn't count at all. So anyway, so yeah, that was a weird statement for me to say. Anyway, my point is, great regeneration scene, would you agree?
Yeah, although I want to, go through some of the steps of my thought process, at least from, the stuff that Rose is doing.
Okay, you can explain your side of it. I'll just say again, I think it's a good story in how it does bring closure to the Doctor, so when he regenerates, he's more or less at peace with some of the things he's gone through in this incarnation, and that does pave the way really, really well for the 10th Doctor and what he's going to go through. And I think that progression is really natural, and I love that regeneration scene, and the whole theme of the episode is strong. What's your opinion?
Okay, so, and I agree with all the stuff you just said, but I think you having started with the Revive series, you're still, more looking at it from the perspective of Rose, and that's kind of inevitable because she's the audience proxy, but having seen the classic series, I always see the Revive series from the perspective of the Doctors, particularly the first series, or for the first Revive series. And how I look at it is that, so the Time War's coming back because the Daleks are coming back, and the Doctor needs to stop it, so he's going to set off the gamma ray burst and fry all the Daleks, kill the Doctor, kill all the humans on Earth, but not all the humans because humans have spread out across the galaxy.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
So only 2 genocides, himself and the Daleks. And so he sends Rose back into the past to save her life, sends the TARDIS back into the past with her, And he tells her basically just leave the TARDIS, lock the TARDIS, leave it alone, live your life, have a good life, Rose.
Which, by the way, that is a fantastic scene.
Yes, it's a really great scene. Then Rose, like the dumb, clingy bitch that she is, she goes through, she starts whining about how, okay, someone needs to be there for the Doctor, while he's saving the entire universe right now.
When I said I didn't like some of the writing, it's what Sean's talking about.
Yeah, no, and so what, Rose has this whole thing where she's whining about it, is just like, okay, I'm going to go into the TARDIS, I'm going to open the TARDIS, look into the heart of the TARDIS to get back to the Doctor.
The really annoying line, tell me if you hated this line too, is she's talking with her mother, and Mickey, her boyfriend, and she's whining to them about it, and they're saying, look, he sacrificed himself for you, why can't you just live with it? And she says, because he taught me how to live better than this life, and I should have a better life. And I'm like, that is not what the Doctor taught you.
She's being so selfish about it. It's like, she kind of implies that what she wants is to get back with the Doctor so that she can keep on traveling through space and time.
Right.
Not necessarily to save the Doctor, but so that she can have a nicer life.
Right. And my point here is that the Doctor doesn't take companions so they can be with him forever. If he's teaching them things, it's lessons that they will take back to their time and impart unto others. Like, and tie this back into Elizabeth Slade and Sarah Jane. He teaches her stuff, and when he leaves her, and we see her again in the revived series, she's done that.
Yeah, she's gone with her life and used what she learned from the Doctor to help people and to basically fight aliens from Earth, which is what the Sarah Jane Adventure show is about.
Right.
Anyways, to get back to the dumb bitch.
Yeah.
What she does, so she eventually opens up the TARDIS, and she looks into the most powerful source of energy in the entire universe, not having a single idea how the thing works. And so basically she risks ripping a hole in the fabric of space and time and destroying all of existence to get back to the Doctor, who's sacrificing his life for her. Is that not the stupidest fucking thing you've ever heard in your life? She's going to unleash the most powerful force she possibly could, not having any idea how any of this works? Seriously?
Okay.
That's how I looked at it.
Okay, in Rose's defense, she did not watch classic Doctor Who. She's a
dumb bitch.
She does not know the heart of the... I agree, 99% with what you said. The 1%, though, is that she does not know the time vortex is that powerful.
She should... Well, she saw it being opened before, but like you saw with the TV movie, they opened the Eye of Harmony. It's basically the same thing.
But she wouldn't know that.
But she would have destroyed all of creation.
Yes.
And we can accept that because she's a dumb bitch.
Well, yes. And more, I think of it is that she's being more selfish than anything in how it's written. But back to what I was saying is the theme of it, and I wish they would have just written it straight this way, is that she has loyalty and she's worried about him. And I think, would you agree if they had written it that way and focused on that she wants to save him and stop him from going insane?
And if it had been that Rose knew that she could fix what the Doctor was doing, but from the perspective, she had no idea that opening the heart of the TARDIS would give her the power that it did. She just thought it was going to allow her to telepathically communicate with the TARDIS so that she could go to the future. She had no idea the whole Bad Wolf thing. She was going to become like the most powerful being in the universe and risk destroying all of creation.
Right.
But she should have been able to kind of piece that out, that you don't open the heart of the TARDIS. It's a little dangerous.
You will see this in every Russell T Davies finale, except, I think, David Tennant's last episode. He doesn't always think that stuff through, and it shows, and it's really too bad, because I think there's such a great idea for a story here, and that's what I was trying to get at, is I'm able roughly to look past that, and I am trying to give you the perspective of when I first watched it. The second time I watched this series, and into like the third time, absolutely, I agree with what Sean's saying, because I wasn't watching it from a newbie perspective anymore.
Yeah.
I'd even seen some of the classic series. I know what was going on, and yes, I agree with what Sean said. From a newbie perspective, which was the target audience at the time, it's okay. It works very well.
I should say, I do still really like the episodes, and that it's not necessarily that this makes them bad. It just makes Rose a really annoying, grating character, which gets even more annoying that the Doctor never figures that out.
Right. Okay, so we're done with our discussion of Eccleston, and before we talk about the 10th Doctor, David Tennant, we're going to talk a little bit about Rose Tyler, and I'll open with what my thoughts were as a newbie, but I do like Rose as in her first year, not in her second year.
I think, I wouldn't say that I liked her. I mean, we just went over how she got really weird at the end.
Yeah, and I was going to say
finale.
that.
But I wouldn't necessarily say I liked her, but I thought she was like a fine character. It's not like she was really annoying, but she wasn't like incredibly likable. She was just an audience proxy.
That's why I just said I liked her.
Yeah, she's a perfectly serviceable character for the most part.
And my opinion on her changed drastically the second time I watched it, and even into the second series the first time. But the first time I was watching it, newbie, Rose does exactly in that first series what she's there to do, and she does it very well. And that's to be an audience proxy and to introduce you to the world of the Doctor. And the point is, and this is a little harder when you're an American watching this because she's very, very stereotypically sort of British shop girl, young, post-high school sort of person. And it's trying to say, this is your everyday kind of person, everyday kind of viewer. So Russell T Davies is taking this character to show how fantastic the Doctor is by saying, anyone can put themselves in her shoes. She's a very normal kind of person. And see how fantastic the Doctor's adventures are. It works very well. Her first episode, Rose, is pretty good. I fucking hate her family. And at this point, I fucking hated Mickey, her boyfriend.
But Mickey gets really cool later on.
Yes.
I love Mickey later.
He gets really cool. But at the beginning, I hated her family. But that's not the point. Rose is a good character mostly. And she does what she's there to do. And she and Eccleston do have good chemistry, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think she has good chemistry with Tennant all that much. I think Tennant makes them have good chemistry because he is such a phenomenal actor.
Yeah, he's a really good actor, but it's not as natural.
Yeah, and Billie Piper, who plays Rose, she was a pop star before this, and it kind of shows she's not the greatest actress, but she's not
a horrible actress either. It's like she's a good actress.
Right. What happens is that in the first series, she's not asked to do all that much, and I think the stories where she is a focus are really good. There's a story called Father's Day, where she goes back to meet her father. She does some dumb stuff, but again, it's the first time.
Also almost destroys the entire universe.
Yes, but this is the first time she's done that. The first time she's gone against the Doctor. She should learn, and she ostensibly does learn. They completely erase that in the second series. But
that was a good character development where she is kind of understanding to trust the Doctor, and then that goes away in the series finale.
But so we'll talk about that. So in the first series, she works really well as an audience proxy. She gets the job done exactly as she should. Then in the second series, and I should say the transition point is the end of the first series, where I don't know how they could have written it differently, but she needed to be gone.
Yeah.
And I get, maybe she should have been gone in the first Tennant episode, because it is good, and I did like when I was watching it the first time through, I do really like the Christmas Invasion, David Tennant's first episode, because I'd never seen Regeneration. I didn't really even know what it was. So to have someone there who had already been there and to witness the regeneration along with us is a great idea, because otherwise it would be very difficult to understand that this is the same man, he's just got a new body and slightly different personality. And so it works really well then, and then it gets fucking weird. And I actually will say, I accepted this the first time I watched it because I didn't really know how the series worked, but then you start to realize it works better when this element isn't there, and what's that element, Sean?
The kissing stuff.
Yeah, romance.
That's just... It's
Romance.
just weird. It's just weird.
So Rose in the second series and the Doctor fall in love, basically. Rose has already been in love with the Doctor, which that is okay with me if she has a crush on him.
If it's just Rose, that totally makes sense. Like particularly with her having father issues because her father died when she was just a baby. Yeah. That makes total sense to me. I like that as a character.
Yes. And it's the same, it works okay with the 10th Doctor's second companion, Martha, when she has a crush. If it's just one way, I don't mind that because he is the most fantastic man in the universe.
Yeah,
it's likely that at some point down the line, some woman is going to be attracted to him. It goes way too fucking far with Rose.
Yeah.
And this is where Russell T Davies asks Billie Piper to do way more than she can do, and David Tennant has to make up for it, and God knows he does make up for it, but there's only so much he can do because no one could make this story work. And Sean, you continue the rant.
Okay, so how far in the timeline do we want to go for the rant? Do we want to talk about the whole thing, basically?
Yeah, and then we'll stop talking about Rose and we'll talk about David Tennant.
Okay, so basically, for the second series, Rose is sticking around with David Tennant, and for me, I think the second series, I didn't hate it that much when I was watching it, but I don't remember it that well.
The second series is, and we totally agree on this, is by far the weakest of the revised series.
It's not that it's bad, other than a few, or I guess really one episode in particular is really awful, but it's just very forgettable. A lot of the episodes are just incredibly forgettable.
I think what it is it's a basic kind of sophomore slump. You see this with a lot of TV shows, in that they use up a lot of their best ideas the first year, and then it takes them until the third year to recharge their batteries. But in the meantime, they have to make another season. This is what we get. And it is unmemorable, except that David Tennant is fantastic out of the gate.
Yeah, it's like, and it's kind of weird because when I think about it, I forget that Rose is there, except for the finale episode. Because that's the only, then that's when Rose it just gets weird.
So what happens, and I think it's weird throughout the season, but because there's
But it's like, well, like I said, it's like I don't even particularly remember most of the series.
Well, I'll tell you,
just forgettable.
Here's what I was going to say. Sophomore slumps you can forgive, except when there is something notably egregious about it. And
the Cybermen episodes. I remember those. The Cybermen episodes.
We'll get into that later.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
No. And those are actually, I think those
too.
Okay, I think those are really good, but I understand why Sean takes problems with them.
I can't watch them. I just can't do it.
Okay. We'll get into that, because that's going to be a fascinating discussion for our listeners. But, so Rose is, in the second series, she's fallen in love with the Doctor, and the Doctor obviously is reciprocating, even if they're not, like, holding hands and making out all the time. He's starting to be into her more, and so, like, there's an episode called, is it The Impossible Planet? Yes.
Yeah.
It's The Impossible Planet, where the TARDIS is destroyed, they think, and there's millions of years in the future. Yeah. And they're on this, it's a planet that exists near a black hole, which is a cool idea. The episode fumbles the ball totally. It's a very messy episode. It's a two-parter, and it's
a very inconsistent episode. It has a lot of good ideas, but it doesn't execute them that well.
Like the Ood, who are fantastically done, and when they come back in Series 4, I love them. But anyway, in this episode, that's the episode point, though. But they think they're going to be here forever, and Rose says, well, it could be worse, at least we're together. And she says, and it's very strongly implied that they're going to go live together and basically be like husband and wife. And that's when it gets weird, and it continues to get weird. And then the finale, which is otherwise, I think, fantastic. It's a really fun finale, where the Cybermen and the Daleks fight, and there's some great bantering between them. And there's some stuff with an alternate universe that I really like, and Mickey comes back, and Mickey's become awesome at this point. He's a cool freedom fighter and whatnot. And in this episode, though, Rose is basically, I should back up and sort of the plot for the finale is that in the previous Cybermen episode, they found that there's a parallel universe. It's the same as any other parallel universe that you've seen in sci-fi before. It's all the same, except things are slightly different.
Yeah.
And so there are other versions of the characters there, except there isn't a Rose, because while her parents stayed together and her father lived, they never had children. And so Cybermen end up coming through from that universe into ours, and that's what this finale, it's called Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. That's what this is all about. And at the end, the Doctor comes up with an ingenious Deus Ex Machina to save the world. And it's
Void stuff.
Yeah, Void stuff. It's hilarious, though, because the Doctor wears 3D glasses to find the Void stuff, and it's funny. Anyway, and David Tennant can sell those Deus Ex Machinas pretty well, even though once the episode's over and you think about it, and you're like, that was tremendously unsatisfying. But anyway, so in this Deus Ex Machina, he's sucking all the Daleks and Cybermen into the Void through a very complicated series of technobabble steps. And Rose gets sucked into the Void almost, but then her father comes at the last minute and saves her and brings her to the alternate universe. But now the gap between the universes is shut and she can't get back. And take us to the final scene, John.
Okay, so the Doctor... So basically, Rose, in the parallel universe, even though she has her family back, she has her boyfriend Mickey, who's the most underappreciated boyfriend in the history of ever, basically.
Right.
They drive to Norway to a beach because...
Let me say this. If you've seen Series 5 of Doctor Who and Amy Pond's boyfriend Rory, it would be like if Amy didn't appreciate what Rory does
if
for
almost
her.
didn't even address that Rory ever existed, even though Rory does everything for Amy.
Right. But the thing about Amy and why we love her is she loves Rory for that.
Yeah.
Which is a natural reaction, unlike Rose, who's a bitch to Mickey every single minute.
It's funny
of their
because it's
lives.
almost, in some aspects, Series 5 is almost like a parody of, or a satire on
I absolutely
on the rest
think
of the
it
Rise
is.
series.
Yes, it absolutely is, and we're going to talk about that, because that's one of my favorite things about Series 5. But anyway.
But anyways, yeah, so what happens is basically Rose has a vision about the Doctor telling her to go to some, bay in Norway. And
Bad Wolf Bay.
Yeah, with Bad Wolf, whatever. But she drives up to the bay, gets out, and then the Doctor and Rose have this really sad, really tearful conversation on the beach, and Rose is like, I want to go back. I want to go back to the universe. And the Doctor's like, you can't do that because that would destroy everything. You've tried to destroy the entire universe twice already. I'm not going to allow the third time. He doesn't actually say that, but that's what happens in my head because the Doctor's
He's
not...
basically saying that he is trying to console her and say why you can't come back.
And then there's the whole thing where the last thing is he It's implied that he's about to say, "I love you, Rose," and then the transmission cuts off, that's the point where I'm like, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't. Thank God he didn't actually say it, so it's not technically canon, you piece of shit.
Okay. I will say about this scene, David Tennant sells it.
David Tennant
so
is a really
well.
good actor. It's just like it's just, in moments like that, it's almost like he's not playing the Doctor for me, which is like the worst moments with David Tennant's run, is like, he is so good. And the writing just was not there. It's like David Tennant could have had probably the best run of the Doctors if the ideas that Russell T Davies had could have been executed better and were more fully thought out.
Should we say, though, we do love the revived series. We're focusing on the negative aspects, but you should know everything that... There's so much that's good about it, we don't need to discuss it. It's very well done. It did a phenomenal job bringing Doctor Who into the 2000s. There is very little I would actually bemoan it, except the stuff we're talking about now. Yeah. So just know that even though we're bitching about it, that's because we're...
Yeah, it's because we love it so much.
Yeah.
And also, it's the funniest stuff to talk about is the stuff with Rose.
So, luckily, David Tennant is kind of a romantic figure, but it never gets this bad again. Once Rose is gone, actually, I think David Tennant's run becomes phenomenal.
It becomes a lot better.
Yeah. So, Rose is gone, and the second series is done, and that's great. We've delayed it. Let's talk about David Tennant. We've implied he's very good before, and I'll start here. David Tennant, and I know I've only sampled a lot of the Doctors, so this is not a definitive statement at all, but of the ones I've seen, he's probably my second favorite. Again, I wouldn't rank them. He's kind of... I know who my first favorite is. He's in a tie with a lot of the others, but I love David Tennant. He is so phenomenal in this role right from the beginning. There are a few things he irons out in his performance over Series 2, which is good. That's to be expected. Yeah. He gets better as he goes along. That's great. But I really think he has it down. Part of it is that he looks the part so much. And that's hard to explain, but I just feel like when you see David Tennant anywhere, he can be in regular street clothes, in an interview for something else with his native Scottish accent. He's the Doctor. He just exudes doctorness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the other thing is that he grew up watching the show. He grew up watching from Tom Baker's run through Peter Davis's run. So he is a huge fan of Doctor Who.
Right. And so probably the most apt description of him is that obviously, as with any Doctor, there's a lot of Patrick Troughton in there, and that he's very zany and he can be fun-loving, but there's a darker side to him. And so... But a lot of it also comes from, I think, there's a lot of Tom Baker in him, and that he's very weird in spots. Yeah. And he intentionally does that. He does eye bulges sometimes that have to be references to Tom Baker, I think.
Yeah.
And then there is also a lot of Peter Davison.
Yeah, I definitely see him as a very big mix between the fourth and fifth Doctors.
Yeah. And that's a great combination. Yeah. It works really well. And I think the other thing you should understand about David Tennant is it's kind of what I would call the Jean-Luc Picard principle, which is that why Star Trek The Next Generation works so well is that Patrick Stewart is a Shakespearean actor, and he is one of the best actors living today, and he was one of the best actors living then. So he brought gravitas to the Star Trek series with Jean-Luc Picard that wasn't there before, that really worked. And David Tennant is the same way. He is a phenomenal actor. He is a Shakespearean actor. He's classically trained. You can't ask for a better actor than him. Yeah. And he brings it all of that to this role. And so he can play the silly and be really funny. He can play the dark and be really convincing. And even in moments when the writing, and this is particularly with Rose, where it's not there and the romance thing doesn't work, he does his best to sell it. And when I was watching it through the first time, he sold it to me. I believed it. Second and third time, it doesn't hold up. But, he does a good job making that stuff watchable and bringing his best to it. And though I don't think Billy Piper actually has any chemistry with him, he does make there be some chemistry between them.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell that Billy Piper has almost no chemistry whatsoever with Tennant when she comes back in Series 4. And it's just like, okay, Rose is back. It's like, there's no...
Right.
It's like, even though he kind of acts it, it's like, you just don't feel it between them.
Right. And but he does a really, really good job selling that stuff. And I think as his run goes along, his run gets better and better and better. Yeah. It just crescendos to the end. And that's one thing that's really unique about it, is that there's not like a noticeable drop-off point. It just gets better and better and better.
It like starts off at the weakest point of the Revive series and gets to some of the best stuff in the Revive series, really. Yes,
before Stephen Moffat takes over. But that's like a whole totally different show, and we'll talk about that later. So David Tennant, I think, is a great Doctor. I should say, we have a good story. Sean, at a debate tournament, we found what are called the brainy specs, because David Tennant will pull out these glasses, and he calls him his brainy specs, and it's just to make him look smart, and he has fun with it. And he has a lot of very easily imitable mannerisms. And so at a debate tournament, we found these glasses lying on a table outside. They were long abandoned. We didn't steal them. They are the brainy specs. They are identical in about every way. And so Sean carries these around with him in his long coat, similar to what David Tennant wears, and imitates his mannerisms. And it's very fun.
Yeah, well, I think it's amusing.
Yeah. Just like that. You kind of have to see it for it to be really hilarious. But yeah, Sean can do this well. He's actually... Tell the story of when you did it in a debate round.
Oh, well, so in a debate round, there's a point in time where the two people can basically cross-examine evidence and ask each other questions. And we were talking about WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And he asked me a question about this file that got put on the internet that basically had a whole bunch of leaked documents on it. And so I popped out the brainy specs and basically said, wow, actually, you see, it's a 3.16 gigabyte encrypted file with a 546-bit encryption key, so pretty much you can't really hack into it.
Yeah, so to set the stage for this more, this was a final round of debate, so there was a big audience there watching us, and we found the brainy specs that day, and I don't think we could resist. I was like, Sean, you have to do this. And what's so perfect about that also is that David Tennant is also the doctor who most often technobabbles.
Yeah.
In that he has a lot of sort of Star Trek-esque technobabble that he does that's really funny because he does it so rapid fire. And so Sean did this technobabble about
546-bit encryption keys.
Yeah, with the glasses on, in a full-on David Tennant impression. You didn't hold back.
Well, because it's also because David Tennant wears a suit, so I was wearing a suit, so it was almost like I was cosplaying as him at the time.
Yes, in a debate round, and we won, and it was great. So that was, and I think that was that the biggest tournament we won this year?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. So it was like 86 teams at that one. So I think, David Tennant helped us along to win that tournament. So.
I like to think so.
Yes. Wherever you are, man, we love you, 10th Doctor.
Anyways, are we going to talk about the episodes now?
Yeah, but really quick, any other takes on the 10th Doctor that I didn't say?
What's the 10th Doctor? I guess we might talk about this a bit more, but I think what's interesting about his Doctor is he almost kind of has a reverse character arc of the 9th Doctor where he starts out so happy and lovable. And then he slowly gets, as he loses people more and more in his run, he starts getting more antagonistic and more arrogant towards the end. And it's almost like he doesn't necessarily become a worse person, but like they're definitely at the end, he's a lot darker and a lot older.
I think that is tremendously compelling.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote about this I've been reviewing Doctor Who, the new Revive series on Your Hub for the past week. And what I was writing about basically with David Tennant is that his arc is one of loneliness. Even at the beginning when he's very happy and chipper after regenerating, there's something, he knows he's alone in the universe because he can have Rose, he can have Martha, he can have any of his companions. But what Rose is, and this is where I do like Rose's exit, is what it shows him is that he can think he'll be with people forever, but when it comes down to it, when the chips are down, he is alone. And he will always be alone because he is the only Time Lord and he is so different than everyone else. And now that's what he thinks. It's not really true. And what his arc is learning to live with that. And one of the episodes we're going to talk about with him is where I think he fulfills, at the end of his arc, he realizes how to come to terms with that and realize that why he is the way he is not a negative thing about him, but it's the best thing about him. And that is so compelling, and I think it's not like a Cleston's arc where you can tell it in one series. It takes the 3 or 4 series that he's in to really do it, and it's really good. And it's very open to interpretation what he goes through. But we'll talk about the episode now. This is difficult because what we're going through with this podcast is we're doing best episode from each Doctor. Seems simple. It's very complex when you come to David Tennant because the clear best episode of his run is Blink by Stephen Moffat. Stephen Moffat is basically the messiah of Doctor Who in the modern era.
Yeah, he's basically the new Robert Holmes.
Yeah, he is a phenomenal writer. He plays with time so well because he, unlike Russell T Davies and some of his other colleagues, he can see time in a macronomic sense all the time. And you can, if the Doctor has a time machine, then play with that. Things can happen across all of time and space. Whereas the Doctor doesn't just have to land in a spot and have an adventure anymore, and I love that. And there's a really good idea with that. And Blink is Stephen Moffat at his best. Why we can't really say... So that is the best episode,
it's the best episode
of the David Tennant years, but it's kind of unfair to pick that because David Tennant's only in it for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, because what they were going through with Doctor Who is they basically had to... The actors needed a rest because it's a very hard production schedule. So for Series 2, they had what they call a Doctor Light episode. They've done this with a lot of shows where the main characters basically aren't in it that much, and they're kind of like ancillary roles while like a random actor plays basically the main character for that episode.
Yes, and in the first time they did this, it was Love and Monsters, written by Russell T Davies. And it's the worst freaking episode of the revived series by far.
Yeah,
it is unwatchable.
It's definitely in competition for the worst episode of all time, which in the dark years of classic Doctor Who, that's definitely saying something. Yeah. It's a very awful episode, so it's impressive that they tried to do it again, because that was...
And here's what I'll say about that, though, is that I'm surprised they tried this, because when you watch Series 2, that show it is falling apart at the seams, and David Tennant is holding it together. Why the fuck would you do an episode without him? Of course it's going to fall apart.
The only good moments in that episode are like, just like all the times when David Tennant is the only person on screen, and that's it. It's only David Tennant on screen. It's like, okay, it's fine right now. Then it like switches camera angle. It's like, son of a bitch.
Yep. And so, yeah, it doesn't work. But then it was like, well, and I remember approaching Blink, and I love Stephen Moffat at this point. He did The Doctor Dances with Eccleston, that is great. He did Girl in the Fireplace, which is great. Really hones in. He really introduced the idea of the Doctor's loneliness. I mean, he got to the heart of who David Tennant's Doctor is.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, I knew Blink was a Dr. Light episode when I watched it. I was like, can even a guy like Moffat make it good? Well, yes, he fucking can. This is pretty much agreed upon by everybody who's watched Doctor Who to be the best episode of the revived series before Series 5.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it won so many awards. Neil Gaiman has said it's his favorite Doctor Who, like, ever, in some cases. And Neil Gaiman is a big fan and good writer. His opinion is trustworthy.
Yes, it is.
So let's briefly talk about Blink, because it's not really what we're going to talk about, but it's really good. It's a story about this woman named Sally Sparrow, or is it Sally?
Yeah, it's Sally Sparrow.
Okay. It's something alliteration.
Yeah.
Played by Carrie Mulligan, and she's the main character of this episode. And she has a friend that she goes around with, whose name is Nightingale.
Yeah.
Sparrow
and Nightingale is
the
joke at the end.
Yes, and so she and her friend are investigating this mansion, and there are messages in this mansion left for her that are telling her at points in time what to do, but she doesn't know how this is working. And there are these statues at this mansion. And we don't know it yet, but these statues are the weeping angels. And they are very powerful, and what they do, as the Doctor says, is they kill you nicely. They zap you back in time and let you live to death. And this is what happens to her friend, Nightingale, is she's sent back to like the 20s, and then lives forward and actually leaves. And it's definitely an homage to Back to the Future 2, I think, in that this, as an old woman, Nightingale has this young man send a letter to Sally at the mansion in the moment when Nightingale disappears, and the Weeping Angels have sent her back to tell her what happened. And the episode goes on from there, and I'm loath to spoil it, because if you haven't seen Blink, you have to see it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the Weeping Angels have some very scary powers. They are probably they're easily the scariest Doctor Who villains of the Revive series. I don't know if overall.
So I would say overall, because it's hard, especially now, it's hard to be scary with effects from the 70s.
Right. But and what's brilliant about it is that you could have done this effect in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's very simple. And I don't want to spoil what that effect is, but it's great. They are a phenomenal villain. This story really plays with time. It does happen. It really only happens in one time period for Sparrow, but what's the outfall of it is going all over time.
Yeah.
And the Doctor is in it briefly, and what makes it work partially is that it's not like Love and Monsters where the Doctor isn't even a force in it. The Doctor really is there the entire time. You just don't see him.
Yeah.
And that's what's brilliant about it. And in the moments when you do see him, he's really funny.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great episode. But we should probably talk about a different one, because the Doctor isn't really in it. It doesn't show off what David Tennant does so well. You could really put any Doctor in here and it would work. I'd love to see it with Patrick Trout.
That would be great.
Yeah. Anyway.
I can just see the scene with her having the conversation with the Easter eggs from the DVDs.
Yes.
Patrick Trout on the computer screen.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yep. He can do that kind of matter-of-fact so well, but with that air of frivolity, that would work.
Actually savvy.
Yeah.
See.
Anyway, so now Sean and I, though, are in disagreement past that for what we would pick as the defining David Tennant episode, which is what we're trying to do with all of these, is what defines that Doctor. So Sean is going to take you through his defining one. I'm going to take you through mine, and and we agree both these are fantastic.
Yeah.
We just kind of like a 2-1 situation where we would just be flipped on which one's 2 and which one's 1.
Yeah.
But Sean, you start off.
So then my favorite episodes are this is from Series 3, and they're Human Nature and the Family of Blood, so it's a 2-parter. And these episodes are actually based on a book written from the dark period where Doctor Who wasn't on TV, and with the 7th Doctor being the Doctor, and his, basically the companion being Bernice Summerfield, who's only in, the non-canonical stuff.
This is the author is Paul Cornell. He wrote the book, and he wrote this episode.
Yeah. And definitely when you watch this episode, and if you've seen 7th Doctor stuff, you can definitely see the 7th Doctor in this role as well. As basically what happens is the Doctor has to assume the role of a human, not just acting like a human, but he actually has to become a human because he's being chased through time by this group of people called the Family of Blood, who are trying to basically take his life force so that they can live forever.
And so it turns his physiology and everything into a human, and his memories. He's now Mr. Jones.
Yeah, John Smith. So he he has this machine in the TARDIS that basically rewrites his biology so that he's now human with brand new life, brand new memories, brand new biology, everything. And so he becomes basically a professor named John Smith at a college in Britain.
And in World War I.
Yeah, right before World War I, 1913.
So it's a military college.
Yeah.
They're preparing the kids for war, basically.
Yeah, and his companion, Martha Jones, becomes a servant at the school. And I think one of the reasons why this is such a great episode is because especially for David Tennant, it shows off his acting so well.
Yeah.
Because later on, when he opens up this watch that allows him to become the Doctor again, become a Time Lord, you can see the character change. There's one particular scene where he's walking into the Family of Blood, know that the Doctor has made himself human again, and that his entity is locked up in this watch. And so the Doctor goes onto their ship, and they think that it's really John Smith, still the human, that's going to give them the watch so that they can get all their life force back. But really, the Doctor's just tricking them, that he's already opened the watch, that he has become the Doctor, and he's just acting like John Smith. So it's the Doctor being John Smith, who was the Doctor. So It's basically David Tennant's playing a character who's playing another character, and then there's a switch that's just suddenly made, where John Smith suddenly he unveils that he is the Doctor, and it's just, you can tell so clearly.
Yeah.
He doesn't even say a line when the switch happens. You just see it in his face.
And I will also say, why this is such a defining David Tennant episode is it's kind of the Doctor getting what has been his wish, unwillingly maybe, but it's what he's been thinking is, if he was a human, and if he belonged, especially in one of his favorite historical time periods, teaching, which is obviously what the Doctor would be great at, isn't that kind of what he wants? He's so lonely, and he's got so much sort of angst built up at this point. Maybe that's what he wants. And this episode is very much a dissection of the Doctor in saying, well, let's look at what the Doctor would be if he was human, if he was John Smith. And it's fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that Smith becomes his own person. And so when the Doctor has to take over again, it's like he's killing John Smith.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like it's him killing a part of himself that he's gotten over now. He doesn't need anymore. And that's why it's such a fascinating 2 hours.
Yeah.
And also, I should say, I think this is also one of Martha's best stories.
Mm-hmm.
I really do like Martha Jones. That's where I was getting Jones from, actually.
Yeah.
Martha is a really cool companion. Definitely a step up from Rose in that she's got tremendous chemistry with David Tennant, I think.
Yeah.
She's a good Freema Agyeman is a really good actress. And, I don't know why the Doctor would travel with Rose, who has no special talents or intelligence, but you can see immediately why he would travel with Martha. She's a doctor. She's determined. She's the ideal kind of companion.
Yeah.
Except that she does develop a crush on the Doctor, which, again, I think that's understandable. And it's poorly written sometimes, but for the most part, it's not that annoying.
Yeah, it's not as omnipresent as it was with Rose.
Right.
It's just kind of in the background sometimes.
And this is the episode, actually, where they use that for the best force, because it's her. She is so loyal to the Doctor, and it's not just because she wants to have sex with him like Rose. It's because she really does love him, and I think she's still grappling with, is that on a friend scale? Is that on a romance scale? And in this episode, Mr. Smith doesn't really, John Smith doesn't really look at her. He's looking at her as a maid. She's she's his first full-time black companion, so sometimes when they're in the past, she has to deal with what life was like.
Yeah, she has to deal with the racism.
Right, and so even Mr. Smith is kind of racist to her in that way, and doesn't totally value her, and that's kind of an interesting dynamic for her to play, and that's another thing I like about this episode. But if we're talking about, from the stance of David Tennant, yes, it is one of his best acting showcases.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to say about this one?
Another point that I really like is with the Family of Blood. There's one guy who the Family of Blood basically assumes the forms of other people, and they take over the form of this one, basically school child, so this 18-year-old guy. I don't know what the actor's name is. That guy is fantastic.
Yeah, he's really good.
He's really, really...
alien.
Yeah, he's really, really alien. It's like you can tell that's an alien living in a human body, and he has all these great lines with the schoolmaster because they're going to attack this school, and he just has all these very sarcastic, just barking orders and stuff at the schoolmaster, and when you watch the episode, just point out that guy. That guy's just fantastic. I don't know who he is. I've never seen him in anything else, but I love him in that episode.
Yeah. So it's a really good story. Season 3 was really on a roll at this point. Yeah. We've had some really good episodes. Blink, I don't know if it directly follows this one, but it's very close.
Yeah, it's near the end.
Yeah, and so watch Season 3. It's really good. My pick is David Tennant's very last episode, though. It's The End of Time, specifically The End of Time Part 2. What happened is that at the end of Series 4 of Doctor Who, they were intending to do, I think, a 5th full series with David Tennant to be his last year. But David Tennant, his commitments with the Royal Shakespeare Company prevented him from filming a whole series. He was playing Hamlet at this point. That's been a very celebrated turn as Hamlet, and it's on DVD and everything even now. But that's why he couldn't come back for a full series in 2009. So instead they did a series of 5 specials. And the specials actually aired over 3 years, which is kind of funny, but really only in one. But Christmas 2008, 3 in 2009, and then the 5th was New Year's Day 2010, which means David Tennant has the second longest set of years for the Doctor, even though he's not one of the longest running Doctors. Because his years technically are 2005, because his first episode was Christmas 2005 to 2010, even though his last episode was January 1st, 2010. So really you would say that is more 2006 to 2009, but his official years are much wider, which I think is funny.
Well, although this might annoy you, technically Paul McGann is the longest serving Doctor, because it was 1996 to 2005.
Motherfucker!
Yep.
Anyway, that's not important. So anyway, End of Time is the last 2 specials. It's a 2-parter written by Russell T. Davies, and this isn't just a finale to David Tennant, though it's very much Journey's End, the finale to Series 4, kind of wrapped up with all his companions and stuff.
Yeah.
So for this, it was very much just focusing on that Doctor, but it also ties off a lot from the entire Russell T. Davies run, because this was Russell T. Davies' last episode as showrunner and as head writer. After this, he was departing the series along with David Tennant and all the producers. There was going to be a new crew coming in to do the show, led by Stephen Moffat, which I think to everyone on Earth sounded like the greatest idea ever.
Yeah.
So great. But anyway, so The End of Time is more than just a finale to David Tennant. It is specifically a finale to
the RTD run.
Right. And so there's actually a lot of stuff that from the 9th Doctor is resolved too, I feel. Because, we talk about there's different Doctors, but it is one character, and that's one thing this kind of hammers home. At the same time, The End of Time is a brilliant story because it's all about regeneration. And how there hasn't been, and I checked with Sean on this, because I haven't seen all the regeneration stories, but there hasn't been a story that gave this much focus to what regeneration is and how it affects the Doctor. And he's scared of regenerating at this point. He's scared that he will not be who he is, and he really likes who he is right now, and he doesn't want to undergo that change again. But what I think is funny about this is that at this point, he's had this whole arc where he's lost all his companions, he's alone, and he's decided he's better off alone, and he's going to go off and he's acting recklessly. It's almost like he's off on a drunken spree through space and time, having wild adventures, and he's being reckless and crazy, and he has a totally out-of-control ego, as we see in the special proceeding that's The Waters of Mars, which is tempered in that episode, his ego, because it ends disastrously for him. But, so he goes into this. He doesn't want to die, but he's not really living like the Doctor should be.
Yeah.
And so The End of Time is a story. I look at it as a story of how the Doctor goes from thinking he's living and thinking this is great and why he doesn't want to regenerate to realizing what his life really is and then coming to peace with regenerating and coming to peace.
I'll
give you my interpretation. He does not fully, but I'll give you my interpretation of that scene. but coming to peace with what he should have been doing, and what I read his final scene as is regret of why he didn't spend his time as the Doctor more as he should have near the end. But the end of time, it's 2 parts. Part 2 is fucking fantastic. It is just perfect beginning to end. Part 1 is, and this is really weird, it is one of the messiest episodes of the entire show. Like, I was really worried, because Russell T Davies has this penchant for doing finales where he goes way in over his head. He tries to do too much. And in fact, the Series 3 finale, which is the first time we meet the Master in the revived series, played by John Sim, is fantastic. It's 3 parts up until the last part when he goes too big with it. I was just so sad about that because it's so good until the end.
Yeah, that is kind of, in my mind, that's a big characteristic of the Russell T Davies years, is that it's a lot of good ideas and like a lot of really good setup, but it always feels like Russell T Davies just never quite thought it through and was setting up stuff that he never knew how to resolve.
Right. Well, End of Time is the polar opposite.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to set it up, but by God does he know how to resolve it, because Part 2 is fantastic, and that's really what I'm talking about here is just Part 2. I watched it again the other night, I think for maybe the second or third time, and I just loved it even more than before. It is such a great send-off to David Tennant, because it allows him to run the full gamut of why he's a great actor and all the things he does as the Doctor. One of the first scenes is he has this speech with the I should probably back up the plot of this episode.
Yes.
The Master has come back, and this is the part of Part 1 that really doesn't work, is Russell T Davies must have known the Master was coming back, because this story was definitely planned out.
He set up the stuff to have the Master come back at the end of Series 3.
My question is, at the end of Series 3, he kills the Master. Why did he do that? Because Part 1 is almost all devoted to bringing the Master back, and it doesn't work. It is so weird. It's like a Deus Ex Machina in reverse, where bringing the villain back is the Deus Ex Machina. And it's really cheesy, and John Sim is given no direction. He's just chewing the scenery, and he's not doing very good at it. And I like John Sim.
Can I talk about the Master a little bit? Because we haven't had a Master episode yet, I don't think. We never really addressed this.
I've only seen John Sim as the Master. I don't know what the Master is like normally. What is he? How does he compare to other Masters?
Well, because there's only been, I guess, 4, if including John Sim, 4 actors to play the Master. There's Roger Delgado, the first one. Then there was Jeffrey Beavers, who played him kind of twice when the Master didn't pop up a whole lot. Then Anthony Ainley, who was basically the Master for the 5th, 6th, and 7th Doctors. And then, if you want to count Eric Roberts, I guess you can.
And you could count Derek Jacobi.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But that doesn't really count because he's not the Master, really.
Even though I think he should have been, because he was really good. Because he was kind of like how the Master was in the past. The old Master, Roger Delgado, and Anthony Ainley, they're basically the same character. I mean, Anthony Ainley, in his makeup and everything, looks almost exactly the same as Roger Delgado, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But
anyway, so John Sim, in the end of Series 3, becomes the new Master. He regenerates. And what happened? What do you think of John Sim?
He's way too over the top. He never ever felt like the Master to me. And it's just, and in Russell T Davies, in this episode, he addresses kind of this really weird thing that he did where the Master has the drum beat thing.
In his mind, which is there his whole life and is driving him crazy.
But which does not link up anywhere in the classic series. And it's very jarring to me because it turns, basically the Master's the Joker. He's almost like, he's just the Joker.
And I will say, John Sim he's too over the top, but I don't really blame John Sim for that.
He's not the right actor for the Master. The Master should be an older, more distinguished kind of, because he's not over the top, he's not jumping around, he very much sits and plans out these large schemes to try to get power for himself.
Yes. And I totally agree. What I think happens in Part 2, though, of this, is that they tone the Master down for this last hour, and he's still over the top in some scenes, but he has some quiet scenes where John Sim is fantastic. And if he was playing a different character, he could be so good. Like, he could be a great companion, he could be a great enemy who isn't the Joker, because he doesn't do that over the top stuff well, so I'm not sure why they cast him. But anyway, I mean, there are some quiet moments. Specifically, there's a speech the Doctor gives, and this is really David Tennant doing great, but John Sim is good in this scene too. What the Doctor is trying to say to the Master, you are so brilliant, you are so smart, we could be a great team. You could be, his line is, you could be so beautiful if you weren't doing this. Because the Master has this big plan to take over space and time, which is weird. Anyway, but and so the Doctor is saying to him, you want to own the universe, but you don't need to own the universe. It's enough just to observe it and to witness the whole of space and time. And John Sim plays it really well, where the Master calms down and he's thinking, maybe I should do that. And I love that moment, because I feel like that's organic. And they don't always get to that with the Master, but for this episode, I think they use him well. And getting back to the drum beats, the Master hears this tapping of 4 over and over again in his head his entire life. And as we find out in this episode, this is the first episode of the Revive series where we see the Time Lords. And we see them in the Time War, and they're scheming to try and get out of it, because the Time War is time-locked. Think of it as a big bubble, and no one can get in and no one can get out.
It's not a bubble, but think of it as a bubble.
Yes. Yeah, David Tennant says that.
Yeah.
And so the leader of the Time Lords is played by Timothy Dalton, who is so great.
Yeah, no, he plays Rassilon, and there's a whole... Like, once they bring back the Time Lords, it's funny, because they got rid of them to get rid of the continuity. Then as soon as they bring them back, they name the leader of the Time Lords Rassilon, and there's a whole lot of history with the name Rassilon with Time Lords. It's just like, all of a sudden, they brought all this continuity stuff back, which I like that.
Yeah. So anyway, Rassilon is a great character. Timothy Dalton
is really good.
Yes, and I love Timothy Dalton. He's also been on Chuck this year, and he's the best villain that show's ever had. But anyway, Timothy Dalton's really good. Their scheme actually was, and this is the only time I think where Russell T Davies uses time as well as Stephen Moffat does, where he has this idea that they send into the Master's mind as a child this beat, this drum beat, because that provides a link for them to get out of the Time War later on when the Master has enough power to transmit this beat of 4. But they also send this 5-point star to Earth. It's this thing from Gallifrey, and that allows them a physical link. And so it's very complex, but they end up coming back to Earth. They bring Gallifrey, which is going to come in and basically overtake Earth and take its spot in the solar system.
I'm not entirely sure how that's supposed to work.
No,
it just looked like the two planets are going to crash into each other. But.
Yeah, but that's not important. I think it's a compelling story, and I do understand, and I agree, it really doesn't make sense with the continuity of the Master, but I think it's such a well-done story in the end of time that I can forgive that, and I know I haven't seen...
you haven't seen any of the rest of the Master,
right,
so
but
you?
I'm saying there are enough continuity discrepancies within the classic series.
But this one's different because it's kind of trying to rewrite some of the classic.
I know,
and it rewrites completely the Master's character, which just really bugs me.
All right, but if you can take that out of it, do you like this story?
Yeah, no, I do really like.
Okay,
the time part.
So my point with the end of time is that the Time Lords come back, and what we learn, and this is bringing stuff full circle for all the RTD years, is that the 10th Doctor, or not, well, I don't know which Doctor, but the 10th Doctor is fighting them. But at this point, he reveals to the Master that the Time Lords, their plan at the end of the Time War was called the Final Sanction. And what it would be was they were going to destroy all of space and time and ascend to higher levels of consciousness without bodies, basically become angels or something.
Yeah.
And that would end the Time War. And obviously the Doctor could not let that happen, and that's what drove him to do the most violent action of his entire life. And I really like that moment. And so this brings David Tennant back to the beginning of where he was with the 9th Doctor. Yeah. And he is willing to kill either the Master. He has a gun that he got from Wilf, who's an awesome companion. We don't have time to talk about him, but he's a grandfather who's awesome.
Yeah.
And Wilf has given him this gun, and he's going to shoot either the Master or Rassilon. And if he does either of those things, the link will close. But he can't bring himself quite to kill anyone again because he's made a pact not to do that anymore. He's very much a peace-loving Doctor. He doesn't use violence. But it's this moment where the Final Sanction is coming back. He doesn't know what to do. And so, I won't spoil everything that happens, but there is a solution, and the Master ends up, because of what he's learned, sacrificing himself for the Doctor to save the Doctor and get revenge on the Time Lords who tortured him his whole life. And I think that scene is great. It's just a great ending. And then what happens is the Doctor, there's radiation in the room. I'm oversimplifying this greatly. But anyway, he has to sacrifice himself to save Wilf. And this is where I think this episode gets so good, is that it brings back this theme of loneliness for the Doctor, where he starts to work through what was going on. And he's saying he's so angry when he finds out he has to die to save Wilf. There's no question that he's going to do it. It's kind of like Peter Davison. He's going to die to save Perry.
Yeah.
Same thing here. He's going to die to save Wilf. But now he's kind of angry about it because he's saying, I could have done so much more. This is probably my favorite David Tennant moment. His speech here is so good. He says, why is this my reward for the things I've done? I've done great things. I am so great. And his arrogance is here. But then he calms down and he says, you realize that this is all just him posturing. He's not mad at Wilf. He's mad at himself, I think, for...
Well, I think he's kind of... The way
I
I
interpret
interpret
situation.
The way I interpret it is he's just kind of... At this point, the Doctor's just so frustrated with... Because he is getting really old, and he's just frustrated with how throughout his entire life, all he's wanted to do is basically live and let live, basically, but he can't do that, because as soon as he sees injustice, he has to counteract that. And that's... You get so much of this arrogance in the 10th Doctor, where he... Basically, since he's the last of his species, and he has so much power at his control. He has so much power with the TARDIS that it's almost like there's almost kind of two 10th Doctors. There's like this very peace-loving 10th Doctor, and then there's the very arrogant, very powerful 10th Doctor. And it's this moment he kind of reconciles those both, where it's like, yes, I have so much power, but I'm not going to use it.
Right. And I agree with that. And this actually leads good into my conversation. He's mad at that, but at the end he's like, this is my role, and I accept that. And there's that moment where Wilf says, I'm so sorry, before the Doctor sacrifices himself. And the Doctor's kind of teary-eyed and says, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but this is kind of the look on his face is, don't you dare think that this is an honor. If I had to die for anyone, I would die for you. And he just is so honored by getting to die for Wilf, and I think that's so great. And the what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Radiation. The radiation starts a regeneration process, but it doesn't kill him immediately. So he has time to go. What he does is he revisits all his companions, and he says, I'm going to go get my reward. And he already used this term to say, what is my reward? And I think this is where, and it's very subtle, and I think you have to kind of interpret it. And this is my interpretation of it, is that the Doctor's had this theme of loneliness with the 10th Doctor and that frustration. But what he realizes here is as he goes and looks through all his companions, and this is his reward, is he gets to see the impact he's made on people's lives and see that they are making impacts on other people's lives now. One of the best moments is Mickey and Martha, who have gotten together now, are fighting a Sontaran.
Yeah.
And that he saves them from the Sontaran, but he also sees that look how much better he's made these people by being into their lives. And that he gets to be their friends, and that's his honor. Just like when he said to Wilf, it's an honor. And so this is how he comes to terms with his loneliness, is that, he will never really die. This incarnation of the Doctor will never go away because he's still there in all the people he's impacted. And that's what the Doctor's role is. And I think that's how he reconciles his frustration at everything going wrong, is that at the end of the day, the impact he's made lives beyond him.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of interesting. I want to talk about how... I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a Sarah Jane Adventures episode with Matt Smith, Death
I've read
of the
about
Doctor.
it. I didn't get to see it.
Where the Doctor basically... he has this conversation where in the episode there's Sarah Jane, and then also they brought back Katie Manning, who played Jo Grant, the companion right before Sarah Jane. And there's basically this moment where he's talking to Jo, where Jo asks, why did the Doctor never go back to see her again? And because the Doctor has seen Sarah Jane several times again.
Yeah.
But he's never gone back to see Jo. And he says basically that in his last generation, when he was right before he regenerated, he went back, and it's implied basically that he went back and looked at all of his companions, not just the companions that the 10th Doctor had, but all of them.
Yes.
And that he looked back on all their lives, and I think Sarah Jane says that you have... I think this is actually in the end of Series 4, but the Doctor has the biggest family in the world.
Yes.
Because he has... Right.
It's a great
so
line.
many companions, yeah.
And this is what I think, this is why he says my reward, and this is why when he goes to his death in the TARDIS and he's about to regenerate, David Tennant's last line, which is pretty iconic by now, because David Tennant was so iconic.
Yeah.
He says, I don't want to go, and then he regenerates. And he's so sad, but at the same time, how I read that is that he's so overcome with emotion by what he's just seen with all his companions that, of course he doesn't want to go. Look at how many lives he's touched. And that's where I read that, is that he's kind of sad, but not for the reasons he was before. Now he's dying and being sad about it for a different set of reasons, which is that he doesn't want to lose who he was, who impacted all these people. And I think that's a really good arc. And I think Russell T. Davies was never good at subtlety, except in this episode. And the way he subtly tells that story is beautiful. It's just really beautiful. And I love that moment. And then he regenerates into Matt Smith, and there is a new era of the show we're about to talk about. So, Sean, what article of clothing is cool?
Bow ties, I'm pretty sure.
Bow ties are cool. And why are they cool?
Because Matt Smith wears one.
Yep. Matt Smith is the 11th Doctor. We are into the new era of the show. I would almost say this is like the promised land for Doctor Who fans of the show. This is Stephen Moffat. After Russell T Davies departed, Stephen Moffat takes over the show, becomes the new head writer. He's selected a new Doctor, Matt Smith, who is the youngest ever to play the role. Peter Davison had been holding the record for that at 29. Matt Smith was 26 when he was cast. And so this is the new series, Series 5. And I will go on record, I've said this before, Series 5 of Doctor Who is one of my favorite TV seasons ever, bar none. Like, top 5. If I were to list my 5 favorite TV seasons, it is in there. It is so amazing. Stephen Moffat's episodes before this, they're very much puzzlers. They take place all over time and sometimes space in the implications of what happens. And what Series 5 is like a full season of that.
Yeah.
And it is so rewarding and it also, I think, better than maybe the Russell T Davies years does, it goes back to what made the classic series so good while modernizing it, and it's like the ultimate realization of what Doctor Who can be in the modern era. They even redo the TARDIS so that it looks like the old TARDIS, but a new modern version of it. And that's a brilliant redesign. Everything about Series 5 worked for me.
Yeah, it's definitely my favorite season of the revived show, hands down. It's
fantastic.
It's fantastic.
As the Ninth Doctor would say. Fantastic.
That was a horrible impression.
Well, you do yours.
Fantastic.
That was a wonderful impression.
Thank
See,
you.
I shouldn't do impressions.
No, you shouldn't.
Okay. So, you know why we love Stephen Moffat. We've talked about it before. But Matt Smith is hands down my favorite Doctor. And again, that's not, I will come out and say, I haven't seen all of them in the way Sean has. So don't take that in the same way you would take maybe Sean's. But assertion that Patrick Troughton is his favorite. I love all the Doctors I've seen pretty much, except the 8th and some of the 6th. But anyway, Matt Smith, though, I don't even know where to begin with him, except that it is maybe, and I haven't seen all of the Doctors and all their runs, but one of the most, or the most complex takes on the Doctor, in that he is very young, but he is, determined to make the Doctor very alien and very old. And I think he does that, and very wise. And he does that really, really well. When I look at Matt Smith, I buy that he is a 900-year-old Time Lord more than I do with any of the others, except maybe Patrick Troughton also really hammers that home.
Patrick Troughton does.
Although Patrick Troughton also does have on his... I'm not trying to take away from his performance. He does have on his side that he looks older. But Matt Smith, what he has on his side, though, is that he looks kind of alien. And he
has a weird head.
Yeah, he plays that up, though. And the camera does, too.
And he has a weird walk. He
Yes.
walks weird.
He the way he holds himself, the way he talks, the way he acts, he just exudes, alienness. Yeah, no, that's not a word, but he's very alien, but he's also very wise and old, and there's just this wisdom and age to him that is very palpable. And there are sometimes when it comes through as just weariness that he is an old man, and sometimes he refers to himself as you stupid old man, because he's getting to that point where sometimes he's missing things, even though this is one of the smartest and most capable Doctors. But then there's also this side to Matt Smith, which is almost like the petulant child side. He is so fucking funny.
Yeah,
he is hilarious. And part of this with Matt Smith, why he's my favorite, is he has some of the best material to work with. In that he has a clear advantage over like David Tennant and Eccleston, for instance, because he has much better writing than them. So a lot of why he's funny is just that his writing is funny, but he delivers it so well. The Christmas Carol, the recent Christmas special of Doctor Who, showcases how funny he is really well.
There's some choice lines in that one.
Yes.
It's very...
Will you share any of them?
I still think my favorite one of all time, maybe one of my favorite lines in all of Doctor Who is the Doctor in Christmas Carol. He's basically with this kid, and there's these sharks that are basically swimming in the air, and he's going to bring these fish into the room, and the kid's really afraid, and
I know where you're going.
And he says, "Is it going to be dangerous?" And he says, "Yes, it's going to be dangerous, but nonsense, we're boys, and what did boys say in the face of danger?" And he turns around and looks at the kid and he says, "Mummy." And it's my... I just love that line so much. Just how Matt Smith delivers it is so hilarious.
I can't do an impression, but there's another one that's really good in that scene where he's coming in through the boy's window and the boy says, "Why did you come in through my window?" "Because if I went out of the window, then I wouldn't be in the room. Try to keep up."
Try to keep up here.
Yeah. And so it's just, he's a very funny, but he's also very dark and complex. And I very much, though, that I like, they took away almost all of the Doctor's angst, that David Tennant and Eccleston had, and it gets back to just kind of the roots of the character without a whole lot of too much continuity behind him or angst or any of that, and he can just be sometimes the happy-go-lucky Doctor, but still weight of the world on his weight of the universe sometimes on his shoulders, and that comes through really well. He's very intense without being shouty or very clearly angry like a Eccleston or a Tennant. He just can be intense and be there in that moment, and he's so good. And I don't even know what more to say. When we talk about the episode, there's moments that define that, which we'll talk about. But what do you love about Matt Smith?
I think you already went over and I mean, so Patrick Troughton's my favorite Doctor, and he's Matt Smith's favorite Doctor.
Yes, and that's very clear.
Yeah, Matt Smith has said several times that his favorite serial is Tomb of the Cybermen, and you can definitely tell. I mean, even the bow tie thing, Patrick Troughton wore a bow tie. So a lot of Matt Smith's stuff comes from Patrick Troughton, and I think he definitely has a very refreshing interpretation of the Doctor that does bring it back to the classic series a lot more, where they get rid of all that angst, they get rid of all the romance, and they bring the Doctor back to who he was. And it's almost, and you almost kind of need the Russell T Davies era to get to that, where you had to have the Time War to get new people into the show, and then you had to have you had to clean the slate now. You had to be done with the Time War stuff. And now you don't have that overhanging depression about the Doctor anymore.
There are still moments, and I love these, where he very subtly shows that he's still... And the Doctor shouldn't ever get over this. He still has sadness from that. There's a moment in his first episode when young Amy Pond says, I love having you don't have a family, isn't that great? And the Doctor, you can see his eyes kind of glaze over, and he says... Yes, but you can tell it's a platitude. He's not serious. But it's so subtle. Matt Smith is a master of subtlety.
Yeah,
he really is.
And with Stephen Moffat's writing, it's like he just, whenever a situation comes up that needs to sort of address what happened with the Time War, they just get over it really fast. They don't dwell on it like they did in the past, which I really like about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that Stephen Moffat finds a way to simplify the Doctor in some ways, but somehow make him vastly more compelling.
Yeah.
Than he's ever been. It's so great, and I love it. And I mean, and when we get into the episodes, that's really where you see it. And the episodes we chose, I say episodes because it's a two-parter, but it's one story, and it's the finale to Series 5, and it's the Pandorica Opens / The Big Bang by Stephen Moffat. And where do we even start with these? They are so fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Like, work of genius doesn't even begin to describe it. Stephen, because part of what makes you so good is the rest of the season. The rest of the season has to be up to a certain level to make this story work, and it is up to that level. Because this is a story that's told over the whole season, and what makes these two so brilliant for me is the payoff. And we've been building up to this until now, and all the revelations, all the surprises, all the resolutions, the way the problem is solved, the way the problem is set up in this episode, it's all payoff for what's come before. And it's completely satisfying. It's very surprising. It's not like very predictable. Stephen Moffat pays off on every check he wrote in the rest of that season.
And he even manages to build up the series premiering now with the silence.
Right, and he had that from the premiere of Series 5. Mm-hmm. So I love that too. That it's not a perfectly clean ending. Not everything is tied off at the end. And so there's this great moment at the end of the Big Bang where the Doctors, Amy and Rory say to him, well, the universe is safe now. We don't have to worry anymore. And he says, the universe is not safe. The silence is still out there. And it's kind of like gung-ho, get the team back together. We're going to go have adventures again. That's this great ending to the season.
And then they go on a honeymoon.
Yes. On a Christmas planet with fish, which is awesome too.
Yes.
But anyway, let's talk about the Pandorica Opens, the Big Bang.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
Well, should we back up and talk about Amy Pond first? Because she's a key. So.
Yeah.
Amy Pond is far and away the best companion of the Revive series.
Yeah.
And
either
part
her
of that,
or Donna Noble.
Yeah. Part of it for me with Amy is that she is basically, her origin is the 11th Doctor's origin. So they're so inseparable. It's kind of like, I feel like it should be the same thing with the Patrick Troughton and Jamie, where they could build companions onto this character, but I don't necessarily think they should separate the 11th Doctor and Amy unless there's a really good reason for it.
Yeah, well, because they got introduced in the same episode, and that's the first time since the beginning of the series where the Doctor and the companion come together at the beginning. As almost always throughout the show, a companion will carry over Doctors, and it's kind of interesting to have them both meet at the beginning of the
Because the 11th Doctor, right after he's born, basically, he crash lands in Amy's yard. Amy is 6 years old. She lives in this big house alone, basically. She's got one aunt who doesn't seem to be there very much. And she's very brave, and the Doctor, even though he's just regenerated, he's sharp as a whip. He doesn't have really regenerative problems.
Well, he has a few.
Slight, but it's not like a focus. Which I'm glad they already did that with David Tennant, so they didn't need to do it right after that Doctor. So anyway, so the Doctor realizes she's not scared of him, even though he's a madman, climbing out of a blue box. She's not scared of him. She's not scared of this big house, but there's a crack in her wall, and she's terrified of this crack. And
that has to be one hell of a scary crack in your wall.
Yes.
I love that line.
And so they bond this night, and it's really cute because he's trying to find a food he likes, and she's trying to help him. You're Scottish, fry something.
You're Scottish, fry something.
It's wonderful.
What is this nonsense? Apples, I hate apples. And you have to give props to, I don't remember her name, but the girl who plays young Amelia Pond, who's actually the cousin of Karen Gillan, and she looks exactly like Karen Gillan as a little girl.
Yeah.
She's one of the best child actresses I've seen.
Yeah.
And she's in, a pretty minor role.
Yeah, but she's
not in it for a lot.
Right. She's having to keep up with Matt Smith, who's on top of his game.
She's really good in this, and she comes back in Pandora Opens and Big Bang.
But we have to explain this first for you to get Pandora Opens, because what happens here is that he closes the crack, but ends up releasing Prisoner Zero into the universe, and this kind of is the plot of the 11th hour of the premiere. That doesn't come back, but the cracks do. And what happens with Amy, though, is after this, when he closes the crack, he leaves in the TARDIS to try to fix it, and when he comes back, he thinks he's coming back 5 minutes later because he wants to hang out with young Amy some more. He feels he owes it to her, and I think he also is very intrigued by the strange aspects of her life.
Yeah.
But he ends up coming back 12 years later.
Yeah, because and also at this point, the TARDIS is basically exploding.
Yeah. And it's wrecking. So he comes back much later in her life. She thinks he was just her imaginary friend, the Raggedy Doctor, because he was dressed in the tattered remnants of David Tennant's clothes. And so they have this adventure in that episode, and then he's going to come back for her again because his TARDIS is just regenerated and he wants to look at it. But he ends up coming back 2 years later, on the eve of Amy Pond's wedding to her boyfriend Rory. And Amy leaves with him to go have adventure. So she's waited a long time, and that creates such an interesting dynamic between them, that she's the girl who waited.
Yeah.
And you see, that's why the Doctor, she's kind of like Rose in that she doesn't have a special, extraordinary skill set, obviously, but the Doctor sees something in her. But this time we see what the Doctor sees in her. And that's that devotion and that spunkiness and that, she is so much more than she appears to be, but also that he is fascinated. It's kind of selfish for him.
Yeah.
He's fascinated by the strange aspects of her life, specifically the cracks, because the crack was not just a crack in her wall, it was a crack in space and time. And throughout Series 5, they're reappearing, and we learn so much about them that what happens is that the TARDIS explodes at some point in the future, actually the day of Amy's wedding, and that creates cracks in space and time that will erase the entire universe from existence. And in the Pandora Opens, that's the problem they're confronted with, is that, the cracks are coming to a head, the TARDIS is going to explode, what's going to happen? I don't want to spoil a minute of this, but except to say that River Song is back for this, who's one of Stephen Moffat's greatest characters. Really interesting, she's meeting the Doctor out of order and all this stuff. Or he's meeting her out of order, I guess, because he's the time traveler. But, so she's in it, Amy's in it, Rory is in it, which is strange because he shouldn't be, and it's very fascinating. But so there's this whole scenario, and it's hard to talk about this without getting into the plot specifics, but this is where all the stories with the cracks in time and the TARDIS exploding all come to a head in this 2-hour mega event, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think we should address, or at least I think my favorite scene, or I guess it's kind of more than just one scene, but with Matt Smith as the Doctor, it's near the end of the Big Bang.
It's the same one of my favorite
where he knows how to fix the problem, and he's going to have to sacrifice himself, or at least he thinks he does, to have to fix this problem. So he calls over Amy to him, and he's been zapped by a Daleks. He's basically dying right now, and so he's going to sacrifice himself to save the universe. And he has this fantastic speech to Amy.
This is a different scene than I was thinking of. Okay.
Well, because this is when you really feel Matt Smith. I mean, Matt Smith seems old, but you really feel it where he's telling Amy the reason why he had her with him is because she was in that room with the crack in the wall, the crack in space and time, and all the universe was pouring into her head while she was a little girl, and he's just so fascinated by that, and he's just explaining to Amy why she's so special, and it's great.
My favorite
is really good.
My favorite scene, though, by far from that, and I love that scene. That's one of the best. Is after he sort of sacrifices himself, he's rewinding through his own timeline.
And I was going to say, it's for me, it starts with when he's talking to Amy, and then it goes to where you're talking about.
Because what Stephen Moffat does is he doesn't just end the story. There's like a 20-minute, it's almost like a Return of the King style ending, where there's a lot more story to be told once the main problem is solved. And this is where the episode gets phenomenal. Well, it's already phenomenal, where it gets even better. And he's rewinding through time, and he's trying to leave clues for Amy. We don't know it yet, but clues that are going to let him live through her memory. And there's a scene where she's asleep in her bed, little Amy.
And it's immediately upon again.
Yes. And so he sits down next to her, and this is one of the best acted scenes I've ever seen in anything. Doctor Who, whatever.
And I've watched the commentary on the DVD, and apparently Matt Smith did it in one take, which is unbelievable.
Oh my God, I can't believe that. But he gives a speech about, that he's glorifying the TARDIS, and he's saying, the bluest blue in the universe. It will never.
Blue you've ever seen.
And he's not just talking to Amy; he's talking to himself. He says, "It will never leave you." And I also think it's a comment on Doctor Who as a show.
Yeah.
In that what this series has done, and I mean it's a love letter to the show. It's a love letter from him to Amy, the kind of platonic love he has for her. Mm-hmm. It's a love to his TARDIS. It's just such a beautiful scene. And the Doctor is so clearly 900 in this.
Yeah.
And he's so clearly alien, and he's lived so long. And Matt Smith is the single best actor of his generation. There's no getting around it. I mean, no one is this. It's amazing how good he is.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he was basically born to play the Doctor. Yeah. Like, a lot of people say that about actors, and this is the only time I've really felt that that's true.
Yeah. He was put on this earth to play the 11th Doctor, and my God, does he do a good job. But without going into more specifics, I do think, with all my heart, I believe the Pandorica Open / The Big Bang is the most satisfying finale or resolution to a story I have ever seen. It is just every moment is so perfectly built off. And you have to understand, Series 5 is so good, but when it gets to this point, this is when it gets to this next level of greatness. And it's just because they pay it off so well, and it doesn't get more satisfying than this. It is amazing. And I don't know how to even describe that, because again, you would have to go into spoiling the whole plot, and I don't want to do that. But it is just phenomenal. Murray Gold, who we haven't talked about yet, but Murray Gold is the composer for modern Doctor Who. And I think beyond a lot of other stuff, he's one of the most important reasons why the Revived series works, in that he's given it this orchestral score, much like in the States. It's like the equivalent to Michael Giacchino's work on Lost, where it's symphonic, it's big, it's not just the same music every episode. He's writing new stuff every week. And his stuff in the first two series was really good, and then it got really great in Series 3. Yeah. But then in Series 5, holy fucking shit, it gets through the roof.
Yeah.
And especially in this finale. He has this theme for the 11th Doctor that is one of the best motifs of music ever.
It reminds me of like a John Williams theme. It's musically it's very simple.
Yeah.
But it's very powerful.
And in fact, I think his score for Series 5, I have the CD, I've listened to it probably 20 times. It's so good. And it's one of the... It's on par with John Williams' work. Yeah. It is so good. And the music in this finale, it brings it to a new level.
And the special effects have gotten really good with the show, too. Yeah. Everything comes to a head.
Here's one of my favorite scenes. All these aliens are around Earth looking for the Pandorica.
Oh, yes.
And Matt Smith, to drive them off, the 11th Doctor gives a speech to them. And mostly it's just Matt Smith's acting is great in this, and the music is great, but also the effects. Holy crap, how did they do that?
Yeah, no.
There's all these alien ships, and he's in the middle of it. I'm thinking he's probably on a green screen for that, but you can't tell. That's one of the best green screen effects I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so good. But yeah, I mean, mostly that's just, he's a phenomenal actor. Karen Gillan, who we haven't even talked about yet, but Amy Pond is so great, and that's largely Karen Gillan is just great in that role. Arthur Darvill plays her boyfriend Rory, who's in about half of the first season here, the fifth series actually, but he's going to be a full-time companion in the new series, and he's great too.
He's really funny.
Yeah,
I like Arthur.
And his relationship with Amy is great. And what I love is, and this is where we were talking about parody of the rest of the Revived series. In the first few episodes, Amy leaves with the Doctor on the night of her wedding. And it's not because she is sexually in love with the Doctor like Rose. Yeah. It's because she's vulnerable on the night of her wedding. Obviously, that's a thing you can relate to, and understand. But, and she's been dreaming of the Doctor since she was 8. She's always known him, kind of. Mm-hmm. And so, in the 5th episode, she tries to have sex with him, and this scene is absolutely a parody of Russell T.
Yeah, the way Matt Smith's Doctor plays it off, where he's just
he's so asexual.
Yeah.
He doesn't. It doesn't even enter his mind that he would ever have sex with Amy. And he's scared by it, and it's hilarious.
And I think I'm pretty sure it's a deleted scene that I saw on the DVD. But after that, they go into the TARDIS after she like tries to make a move on him.
It's that additional in the TARDIS.
Yeah, and she asks him, you know, what do you like? And he says, I don't know, like Gandalf, like a space Gandalf.
Yes,
and that's how I see the Matt Smith's Doctor.
Yeah.
Is a lot like that. He's a space Gandalf.
Yes. So I mean, it's just it's a very funny parody of that. And then when Rory comes on, and there's a great episode called Amy's Choice, where Amy realizes that she is absolutely in love with Rory, and the Doctor is just her best friend. And from that point on, there's no romance between this. It's very clear cut. Rory is the love of her life, and the Doctor is her best friend. And yet the Doctor also loves her and Rory equally. And the love he has for Rory is the same love he has for Amy. It's not sexual. It works so well. And I think, and there are other moments in the season that I think are a very sly parody of the Russell T Davies years, but that especially is saying, this is what it should be. And it's very compelling to have now this married couple in the TARDIS. That's very fun. And we'll see that more in the new series. But really good stuff. And so there's not much more to say about Matt Smith. He's only had the one series, but in that year, he's gone to the top of my list. And I know, Sean, he's one of your favorites.
Yeah. Definitely my favorite of the new Doctors.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, really great stuff. And we're going to take a break from the podcast now. It won't sound like a break to you, but we're going to go watch the Series 6 premiere so we can come back and tell you all about it. You'll probably have already seen it, but we just want to analyze it. So realize at this point there will be spoilers. We're going to get in-depth on it, unlike what we did with Pandorica Opens. If you don't want to hear anything about the new series, turn the podcast off now.
There will be spoilers ahead.
Yep. Go watch Series 5. If you don't want to watch through the Russell T Davies years, which you should. They are good, even if they aren't always great. Series 5 is actually, you can start right there and you'll be fine. I would recommend maybe watching the episode with River Song from Series 4.
Yeah, or at the very least, read up about some of Doctor Who, because at the very beginning, it kind of jumps you in.
Yeah.
But once you get past that, you just have to kind of understand the context of the show. And if you're listening to this, you do. So,
yes. We've been talking about Doctor Who for about 6 hours, all told, on this podcast. So anyway, goodbye if you don't want spoilers. If you do, we're going to spend about 15 minutes now talking about the Series 6 premiere on BBC America, The Impossible Astronaut. You can also read my full written review on yourhub.com right now. It's up there. So we're going to take a break to watch this episode. See you in about 2 seconds of audio time. And we're back.
There we are. Okay.
Hey, Sean, what's up? We just
much.
watched a great episode of Doctor Who, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
All right, so Sean and I literally just finished watching the Series 6 premiere, The Impossible Astronaut. And it was quite the hour. I'm not sure where to begin, but general impression of the hour. What would you say?
I would say probably. I mean, it's hard to judge. We were talking about this. It's kind of hard to judge it because it's just the first part of a 2-part episode, basically.
And so we've really only seen half the story, and so it's hard to judge it out on its own terms. But I mean, this half of the story was great.
Yeah, and so far the setup for everything is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And as we've seen with Series 5, Stephen Moffat is very good at paying off his setup. So.
Yes. And I mean, I feel like really good setup here, and I feel like when we put part 2 with this next week, and after we have this whole story, that's all going to end up being set up for this season as a whole, which I'm sure is going to be very ambitious.
Yeah, similar to what he did with the 11th Hour, where he set up the cracks in time.
Yeah.
He was setting up...
Right.
Or it seems like he's setting up the silence aliens, if that's what they are, and the Doctor dying at the very beginning.
Right. And so let's talk about that, because that is maybe the most unexpected way to open a season ever, to kill off your main character and then bring him back. But before that, I thought, the first 5 minutes, which were hilarious but also awesome, where the Doctor is, sending them a message through time, it looks like.
Yeah.
And my favorite moment of that is he's on the old, silent TV show, and he's dancing across the screen.
It looked like it was like a Marx Brothers film.
Yeah. That was one of those moments where Matt Smith is having so much fun with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And then I just felt like those first 5 minutes were like the beginning of a sequel. Where Series 5 was the first movie, they did that really well. Now they're coming back with expectations. So they're going to do the big sequel, and it's so great to have that. They're getting the team back together. We bring back the 11th Doctor theme. And it's just this great unity of all that coming together. So very much like I said, felt like kind of like the beginning of a sequel to me. And then it takes a very dark turn very fast.
Yeah.
Where the Doctor is shot by this astronaut, and is killed during his regeneration process.
That was I think that was a really great idea to do. That like. Because at least for me, it's like that so conveys that the Doctor's actually dead.
Yeah.
When you see he's starting to regenerate and then he gets shot again,
yes.
It's like your heart falls into your gut.
I know. Oh, God, I know.
Jesus Christ.
And then it was like, and then I love that Amy in that moment, she voiced what I think everyone was thinking is it's got to be a duplicate. It's not him.
Yeah.
But we know it is him, and then they burn his body. So the Doctor is...
They gave him a Viking burial.
I know.
I thought that was pretty great.
Well, and I was thinking also kind of like of Boromir at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. They're sending him out into the lake. And they should have had his sonic screwdriver, like across his chest. Interesting, he didn't use his sonic screwdriver once in the episode.
I hope they kind of carry that through. That
yeah.
They've overdone the sonic a lot.
Yeah. So, and I think that must have been a conscious decision. Anyway... So Doctor's dead. He's literally as dead as he could be. His body doesn't exist anymore. But that was very interesting that, we were talking earlier, Sean, before we recorded any of this podcast, about the Doctor's age and stuff relating to that. And if he is, now he says he's 1103. So he's 200 years older at the beginning of the episode than he is at the rest of the episode. Then, he's aged 200 and some years.
Mm-hmm.
And... would that make him one of the oldest Doctors?
Like, it's impossible to say because, like, at least in my mind, all the incarnations except for Eccleston live for a couple centuries at least.
Okay.
Or else he wouldn't possibly get to 900 years old.
How old do you think the first Doctor was when he regenerated?
This is just like totally my fan speculation, but I would say probably 250 to 300.
Okay.
In my head, that's how it works out in my head.
Because he dies of old age, right?
Yeah, and this is also total fan speculation, but I know there are some other Whovians that agree with me that the Time Lord will only die from old age on his first regeneration, and then something with the regeneration process means they don't die from old age anymore. They have to be shot or get radiated or something like that. That's just like, it's not like fact, but the Doctor does say a few times that he could technically live forever, barring any accidents. So that's kind of a line that I take for that.
And also why maybe he lives a little recklessly.
Yeah, and why he kind of burns through regenerations pretty fast.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I was just
relatively
saying,
fast.
I mean, it seems to me like this is the big question of the episode, for me at least, is where is that regeneration going to take place in this story? Or not regeneration, his death. Because he's dead. And nothing's going to change that yet, because I think Stephen Moffat is not the guy who's going to take the cheap route out. Amy shoots the astronaut at the end. That's not going to save the Doctor. We can be pretty sure of that, I think.
Yeah.
We're going to revisit that moment, especially because I know they shot more in Monument Valley, I think, than what we saw.
Well, definitely. I mean, you saw in the pickup for the preview for the second part, there's a lot more in Monument Valley.
Right. So I'm interested, do you think that's going to be the end of this two-parter, end of the season, end of Matt Smith's run?
It's not going to be the end of his run, definitely.
I didn't think that either.
But it's going to, if it was the end of his run, it would be the end of the show.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to carry through for the whole season. I don't think it's going to resolve in the second part necessarily.
Right. One of my theories would be that, he's splitting the season this year for a 7-6 split, and then it's going to be off for the summer. I think where the show's going to split is where we're going to probably learn a lot about this. And the second half of the season, because he said it's almost like two stories he's telling this year. Yeah. That the second season will start with the aftermath of that, or the second half of the season. So I think it. Yeah. My initial reaction was that, well, wait, what if we've had these hints that River Song killed the Doctor, which, as I've said, is probably more obvious than it actually is. Yeah. But what if she was the astronaut? And that was later discounted, as we learned. But lots of just one of those moments that makes you think so much, and I love that. Yeah. So, and then the episode, I don't know if this episode, because most of it is set up, ever got that good again, but that's not the point of the episode. The point was it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Definitely built up the silence as very creepy. That's what we're kind of assuming
we're assuming that the silence, but
these aliens that you can't remember unless you're looking at them, that is such a Stephen Moffat thing to do.
Yeah, I really like the design on the aliens, too. It's kind of, it's not over the top at all. It's just... Right. And they have this very good 60s vibe where they have, like, the three-fingered hand with, like, one finger that's longer than the others.
It's good stuff. I like that. I didn't totally like their first scene with the annoying woman until it got to, like, the end of that scene. Then it got good.
Yeah, no.
I thought that woman was just really annoying, and I'm glad they killed her. But, I mean, that's what you do in sci-fi stories. You make annoying characters to kill.
I thought that's what you did in slasher films.
That, too. That's That's anyone who's not a virgin. And then but there are other appearances, especially the one where River is down there and sees them all, climbs back up really quick and doesn't remember it.
Yeah.
That was really scary. And it's just, I like those frightening moments. This is definitely Stephen Moffat playing by that old adage that you watch Doctor Who from behind the couch when you're a kid. Because he's really made this show scary in his run.
It brings me back kind of to the Robert Holmes, Tom Baker years, where when Robert Holmes was script editor, and they did a lot of
scary.
Yeah, they did. It's hard to say scary, but it kind of it kind of almost felt like a lot of the episodes had a very like universal horror kind of element to it, like Brains of Morbius, and I like he's definitely bringing that sort of horror.
Well, certainly,
element back.
with Tom Baker and Robert Holmes, kids growing up in the 70s watching that would probably be scared, shitless out of that stuff.
Yeah, Gothic. Gothic is the word that I was looking for. It's kind of, and you get that kind of Gothic motif near the end of this part where they're in the kind of dark warehouse, and then they go into the cave, and I like the very dark, dingy lighting.
Yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess the other big moment to talk about is the one they chose to end it on. And BBC America, I'll talk about this in a minute, botched that ending with the cut they did before cutting to the credits. And I almost wish, because of that stuff, that BBC Britain would give them a different cut of the episode that fades or something, so they don't have to do that, because they're obviously just taking the original cut and just chopping it to pieces.
Yeah, and it's
I know it's impossible.
Yeah, it's like they have to do that because they have to get ad revenue.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, but that last moment where Amy, this whole episode we've seen her, clutching her stomach a few times, and I just thought it was the silence was affecting her. But that revelation that she was pregnant, that was a really smart revelation. And I also think, my initial reaction was the same as yours, that, I was like, oh, well, there's just been this kid the whole episode. I think that's her daughter.
Yeah, I'm not positive about that, but I think it's definitely a possibility.
Yes, because that seems like a natural way for it to go. But again, when Moffat's writing an episode, the natural way for it to go is very rarely the way it's going to. But then she shoots the kid in the
astronaut suit.
Yes. And that's a hell of an ending. But
I'm not entirely sure if it was actually a kid in the... Because, that doesn't entirely make sense how it would actually fill the astronaut suit. My theory going into it, as soon as it kind of got revealed that the time machine from the Lodger episode was in this, and that looked like that maybe is how the silent alien or whatever they are got there. In the Lodger episode, if you remember, the time machine used a hologram to lure people in.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
My reaction was immediately, this might not be true, given they kind of changed with the ending, doesn't totally fit with this, but maybe the child was just the time machine trying to get someone to come to it. And that's how it was calling the White House. Yeah.
I would believe that, and that's a good point, and I hadn't thought of that, because... it's kind of weird. The Lodger is a very weird episode, because Series 5 is so airtight, except for the Lodger. It's the odd man out. And I love that. That's a funny episode.
I love that episode, and I know they're bringing the guy back who played the
Matt Smith called it the Lodger 2 is what they're doing.
Yeah, and
just James Corden.
Corden,
he's funny. And anyway, but I think Stephen Moffat said at the time, there's probably more to this than you guys think so far. And I know some of them were mad that this has nothing to do with anything. But then I think me and a lot of other Doctor Who fans were thinking, well, that's probably set up for the next series, just like we didn't learn about the silence in that season.
It was because it was clearly leading to something else that we never found out.
So the Lodger is kind of like the missing episode from Series 6 we got the year before.
Yeah.
And that's cool, so that we can go into that this year with enough background information to make these theories. Because definitely we saw in this one River and Rory go into that time machine from the Lodger. And I love those little rewards for astute viewers who can remember all that.
Yeah.
So, very cool. And I'd forgotten that episode, that we had the hologram in that. But you're probably right about that. So it'll be interesting to see if that's even what's in there is real. That could very much, it moves so robotically, it could be a robot.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, because a child clearly wouldn't be able to fit the suit. It's a suit for like a Neil Armstrong type guy. Yeah. So.
Well, also, it could also be something that, because Amy, admits in that moment that she's pregnant, what if this hologram plays on the vulnerabilities of the people who it's trying to lure in?
And then also, and this is kind of keyed in with the primer for the next episode, where the Doctor says something about how the silence can manipulate people, or the aliens can manipulate people. And that's, clearly that could be a possibility, that the aliens are playing on Amy using their, whatever, extra-dimensional powers.
And because the silence is something you don't remember unless you're looking at it, there's this great opportunity that these guys have been around for so long.
I've actually seen theories, and I was going to... I wish I had read this before I had rewatched Series 5, but there was a theory that one guy had picked out, that I saw on a message board, moments from Series 5 where there are just like a few little shots where there'll be like a character looking off camera with like a surprise reaction on their face for just a few seconds. And knowing what we know now with the silence, I'm betting that those are actually... That was his theory, that was something to do with the silence. And so, it seems like that guy was right. So now I want to watch through Series 5 again and see those moments.
I know. Well, because in the very first episode of Series 5, there was this motif that Stephen Moffat put in it of look in the corner of your eye. It's what you don't expect to see there. And that wasn't totally followed up on that year. But again, I think it's something that was being seeded then for this. And just seeing this master plan sort of unfold, it's so cool to see a thing that's bigger than just this year, than this season. And I love that.
It does kind of, a lot of the stuff feels like the end of the Seventh Doctor's run with Andrew Cartmel was seeding in little stuff with like all the journeys that the Seventh Doctor went on had something to do with a childhood fear that Ace had. And it's like, it was playing across all three of the Seventh Doctor seasons, and you never got to see that play out. This kind of feels like that, where now you can pick out these little moments that he seeded in that are paying off now.
I know.
And I like that I finally get a payoff for something like this.
You know, Sean, and probably a lot of people listening to this know that one of my favorite shows was I guess, ABC's Lost.
Yeah.
And I wrote about that for Your Hub for 3 years. And ever since then, I've kind of been looking for a replacement to write about, because Lost was, whether you like it or not, there was a wealth of material to theorize about and write about, and it's very, very rewarding to write about once a week. And I would have these big analysis articles, and people, love to talk about that with me, because it was such a communal thing to talk about. And I feel like Doctor Who is getting to that point again now, where it can be the thing I can write about in replacement of that, or discuss with, because it is so big and complicated now, but also it's very accessible.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you could totally jump into this one and get it, but there was enough there
this wouldn't be a good starting out. Like you said, it would be like watching The Empire Strikes Back before watching Star Wars.
Right. You could enjoy parts of it, certainly,
but you wouldn't have any context jumping in, and you would just be like a fish out of water.
Yeah, and I think that's a good decision, because they built up so many viewers last year. I don't think, except maybe in America, there's going to be a lot of new viewers.
Yeah.
But they don't need new viewers. The show's big enough already. So, do you think, this is my other question, it's kind of off topic, but at the beginning of this episode, they had that great opening for the theme song. Then right before it went to theme song, it had this really weird...
Yeah, it had the recap. I'm pretty sure that definitely felt like it was put in by BBC America, which maybe was a good choice, since this is the first time it's airing concurrently.
I wish they had done that, though, before the episode started.
Yeah, I agree. That was
so weird.
Spot.
Yeah.
It was like...
They were building up all this, and I'm like, they're going to go to theme song, and you and I, having always watched the BBC versions, we really know that it's going to do that, and then it didn't, and it was like, that's wrong.
Have you ever watched any Sarah Jane Adventures episodes?
No.
Because that's how they opened those, and it was kind of jarring, because they open it with one of the characters, Clyde, he doesn't recap everything that happened, but he explains the premise of the show.
Yeah.
And it felt exactly like that. It was kind of jarring for a second.
Yeah. I wouldn't have minded it at all if it had just been at the beginning.
Yeah.
Quick fade to black, then start the episode.
I agree.
Which would have made more sense to new viewers anyway, because before that, it's not like it tells you who Amy is. So anyway, weird. But let's talk about the lighter stuff in this episode. Just some, what did we like? Very, very funny hour.
Yeah, there are a lot of really, really good lines. I think I really like Mark Shepard as the...
Yes.
I don't remember the character's name, but as this ex-FBI agent. He's such an American character. He's the most American character ever in Doctor Who, and he's not played by an American, which is interesting. But Mark Shepard does it really well. He's played a lot of characters. He's a very good actor.
Yeah, he's a great actor. I've seen someone talk about this online, that he's been in pretty much every genre show ever made.
Ever.
I mean, he's on Lost somewhere, I think. We were just talking about that. He's on there. Yeah. And one of the flashbacks, probably. I mean, he's on everything.
He was in Firefly.
Yeah.
He was the mouse character, I think was his name.
Yeah. So, really great stuff. I know it wasn't mouse, but it was some sort of rodent.
Yeah. He was in the...
Badger.
Badger.
He was in the pilot and a few other episodes of Firefly.
Yeah.
So he's great. But yeah, he does a really good job. He had, what was his line about Nixon?
Nixon said, "You were my second choice for this mission." He says, "That's okay, Mr. Nixon. You were my second choice for president."
Yep.
I really love that line.
A couple other
hilarious.
good exchanges with about Nixon where they're trying to say, well, he did some good stuff as president, and the doctor says, not enough.
and Rivers says, "You hippie archaeologist."
Yep. It was a great little exchange. So, yeah. And I like that they had some little poking fun at Richard Nixon, but they had him a character without letting the Richard Nixon-ness of him overwhelm that.
And I did like, there was some, like, I liked how, I don't know who's playing Richard Nixon, but he was really good, and I liked how he was really paranoid, and that's like whenever I think about Richard Nixon, I always think paranoid, because that's what really came out of the Watergate stuff. Yeah, is that he recorded everything in the White House and stuff like that. Yeah. So I know there was a lot of, he was very paranoid about like what the doctor was doing, all this mysterious stuff happening around him, and I really liked that.
Yeah,
just little character stuff that Stephen Moffat keyed in on with Nixon. That Nixon's not just a throwaway character, that he it felt like he had done some research and like actually knew.
Absolutely. Good stuff. So, really good episode. I also want to say, the stuff with River Song just gets, every time you see her, she's more interesting.
Yeah, it gets, and you can really tell that Stephen Moffat knew what he was doing. He didn't just create River Song as like a character and said, okay, I'll figure out all this stuff with her and the doctor later. He really, you can just tell that he knew what was happening. There was that great speech when she was trying to unlock this door, and she's talking to Rory about how how the doctor knows her
more and more every time he sees her, and she...
the doctor knows her less and less, and she knows him more and more because they're meeting in opposite directions, basically.
From her perspective.
Because the doctor knew her very well the first time they met, and River Song knows the doctor really well the last time they meet, basically, but the first time from the doctor's point of view.
I think this relationship between them is probably... If you want to know what Stephen Moffat is all about, this defines his writing.
Yeah.
Because it's very emotional and poignant, but it's also, it's a puzzler of a thing. It's very out of it, plays with time in a way that this is the only show that you can do that on. And it's amazing. And I think Alex Kingston is so good in that moment. And she's always good.
when she says that the last time she meets, when she looks, when she looks in the doctor's eyes, he's not going to have any idea who she is, and it's just like, he's playing. It's like, because people sometimes forget that River Song dies the first time you see her. She dies at the end of that episode.
I know, and that's just, it seems like that episode, Forest of the
Dead,
Silence in the Library,
from
Series 4, which was with David Tennant. That episode gets better and better the more you know about River Song. Because I haven't gone back and watched it yet, but I'm going to have to, maybe before next week's episode, because, really interesting story. And River is a fascinating character. So
because it seems to me, once all the River Song stuff plays out, watching that episode is going to be completely different, because you'll be watching it from River Song's point of view now, once you know all of her history with the doctor. So I'm looking forward to that.
I know, and especially because it'll be with a different doctor and everything.
Yeah.
So just fascinating stuff. I love that I'm sure Moffat knew when he wrote that first one that he'd be showrunner, but even then, to have the almost, some would say, audacity, but the forethought and the nerve to start a story that was going to take that much forethought and planning and participation primarily from Alex Kingston is a lot. I assume she's going to be a regular at some point.
She's going to have to pop up at least several times throughout the series, it seems.
Yeah. And not just this series, but the ones to come. Because, I think Matt Smith's in it for the long haul, and so Stephen Moffat. There are stories here that, even now, I don't think end of Series 6 this is all going to be resolved. There's a lot to go on here, and I love that you can just keep continuing.
Yeah.
So, not much more to talk about with this episode. Again, BBC America, Sean and I had a lot of fun just making fun of the commercial breaks.
Yeah, every time. It's like, it's not BBC America's fault. They have to get ad revenue.
Of course, it's fine.
But it is just kind of really jarring when it's just, like, I think the first one, it was almost like, River Song, it was like she hadn't even finished her sentence. It was like the last syllable at the end of her sentence, and then it cuts off halfway through.
And then when you come back, you see that it cut to another location, but I'm sure that cut naturally was just continuous, because they do this in shows all the time, where they show that this conversation has continued, but they cut out the middle of it, and they show the beginning and end. Yeah. And that there shouldn't be a cut in the middle.
Yeah, no.
So it was really weird.
There's another one where we were making fun of it where it faded to black for like a split second. You could tell it was just a really quick fade to black in the episode. But like it felt like they kind of like jumped on that fade to black because it was like the only one in the episode. They're like, commercial break here,
right now. Like I'm imagining the BBC America exec leaning over the editor's shoulder, like, no.
Like, you see that second of black? Put a commercial break in there. Yes. That one's kind of mildly natural.
Yeah. So I don't blame BBC America, but except at the beginning of the episode they said presented to you with limited commercial interruption. Limited to what?
Limited to normal commercial interruptions.
Because I looked this up today. The length of the episode in England was like a standard Doctor Who, 44 minutes. That's standard length in America for an episode of something. So it's not like they had less time with commercials for this hour. So yeah, I guess it is limited relative to it could be an hour of nothing but commercials. So
yeah, but I did kind of like that. Half the commercials were like interviews with the cast and crew.
That's true.
That was kind of nice.
Yeah, Matt Smith. We've talked about this before, Sean and I, but in interviews you'll see him. He's often wearing sunglasses, and he looks like Bob Dylan the way he sits there.
Yeah, he's so nonchalant
weird
about it.
Yeah,
he's got a weird head. I don't know what it is. It's just like his head is just like it's a strange shape.
Born to play the Doctor.
Yep.
So great episode, great work by everyone involved. Really excited to see next week's.
Yeah,
and this is going to be a fun series to watch. I'm on board, although I'm already dreading the split in this season.
Oh,
we're going to have to wait 3 months.
So horrible.
Oh, I know. New Torchwood series better be good. Make up for it. Torchwood, newer on Stars this summer.
I'm looking forward to that.
I said New Earth. It's actually called Miracle Day. Yeah. I don't even know where New Earth. That's an episode of Doctor Who. What's the new? What was the new? What was the original working title?
It was something like New Earth or something like that.
All right, so that's where I got it from. Yeah, it's called Miracle Day. That'll probably be good. I will watch. I haven't watched Torchwood yet. I will before that.
Maybe we do a Torchwood podcast sometime.
Maybe top 10 sex acts in Torchwood. Could you narrow it down?
Torchwood's a fun one because Torchwood you can there are a lot of episodes that are really bad, but they're kind of like they're so bad they're good. Yeah. And every once in a while you get like a legitimately good episode. Torchwood's kind of a weird, inconsistent series to watch.
Yeah,
I like it.
All right. So anyway, that's that. You may think the podcast is over, but earlier in this episode, we promised you listeners that you would hear why Sean hates the Cybermen in Series 2. So I'm going to hand the show over to him, and this is the bonus section of the podcast. We couldn't fit it in anywhere else. So Sean's going to tell you why he fucking hates the Cybermen.
Okay, I love the Cybermen. I hate the Cybermen Pretenders in Series 2 in the, what is it, like Age of Steel, Rise of the Cybermen.
Yeah.
That two-parter. And just, I mean, so the Cybermen are one of the big baddies from the classic series. They popped up a lot in the second Doctor's run where the last villains that the first Doctor faced, so they were in the first Regeneration story, the 10th Planet. And so, I really like the Cybermen. I personally like them more than the Daleks. In the classic series, there's just something about the Cybermen, how they're supposed to have no emotions, and yet somehow they're so arrogant and snide in everything they do. And there's, in the 80s, were like the golden era of Cybermen stories, because there's this one Cyberman, the Cyber Controller, who was in all of them, and he had like black handlebars, so you knew it was him. And he had this really deep Darth Vader voice, and just every time he was on the screen, it was so great, because over the course of, like, he was in, like, 5 or 6 stories, and he gained this weird rapport with the Doctor, like, every time they met, it's like, we meet again, Doctor. And it was just really awesome.
I've got to watch that.
So, yeah, Earthshock's a really good one, that's the episode where they kill off Adric, but anyways, so I really, really love the Cybermen. And I was excited to see what they're going to do with the revived series, how they're going to reboot the Cybermen. And I saw it was like the Age of Steel episode when I was watching it on Netflix Instant Queue. I'm like, oh, that's going to be awesome. It's like a 2-parter. That's clearly going to be something with the Cybermen. And what I found out was it's not really something with the Cybermen. It kind of maybe sort of is, but not really. Because what happens is, we talked about this, they go to the parallel universe. So in
cool idea at the beginning.
Seems like parallel universe has been done once before in Doctor Who, in the third Doctor, and the Brigadier, alternate universe Brigadier, had an eye patch on, which was awesome.
That's the only way to make him cooler. An eye patch.
Yeah, no, I was disappointed by the lack of eye patches, but that was not the only problem with that 2-part episode. The main problem was they introduced the Cybermen But they're not Cybermen, because since they're from this alternate universe, their backstory is completely 100% different. They are not anything like the old Cybermen at all. And so they're just pretending like they're actual Cybermen when they're not. They don't have even close to the same origin story. In the classic series, the Cybermen...
I'll say, when Sean told me this, I was flabbergasted that they would...
By how different it is?
Yes.
It's
and that the Doctor would look at them and say, "Oh, they're Cybermen. I faced them before."
Yeah,
but the Doctor should know that. Tell the story.
And this is expanded a lot on the audio drama Spare Parts, which I really recommend. It's one of the best Doctor Who stories there are, and it tells us the origin of the Cybermen. That basically, a long time ago, Earth had a twin planet called Mondas that at some point in time, kind of its orbit got changed and it was getting flung out into the far reaches of the solar system. And so obviously when that happens, the planet basically becomes inhabitable. So all the Mondasians have to go underground, and basically everyone's dying, and the only way they can survive is to basically cyber convert. And it was also it was a very interesting story because people didn't want to have to cyber convert. There's a large faction of Mondasians that didn't want to have to do this, but the only way they could survive, basically, the only way their species would be continue, it would be basically not even become their species anymore, but it's the only way for them to live. But the only way they can handle being converted into cybernetic beings is by eliminating their emotions. Because if they have their emotions, they just simply cannot handle being Cybermen, so they break down. So that's how the Cybermen come to be. They're emotionless beings from Mondas, and then eventually they come back and they try to take over the Earth again and all that stuff. And that's where they are antagonistic towards the Doctor, and they try to basically liberate people by not having emotions. And so that part of the Cybermen, I'm fine with. They have, in the new series, they brought back that they have no emotions. That's great. But how they come about in the Revive series in the Parallel Earth is this one guy, I don't even remember his name, but the guy...
He's like, a crazy fucking
Yeah, he's
doctor.
this like crazy industrialist guy who designs, basically, he wants to live forever, so he creates the Cybermen. It's not only is it not the same origin story, but it's several times less compelling than the original.
And I agree with that because, what worked for me in this episode when I saw it the first time is it's a horrific dystopian future kind of story where, this guy is converting everyone to Cybermen. But then I hear about, and I think it works in that way, if you don't know anything about the Cybermen before, it's a good story in that way. But then when you do hear the original story, and I feel like that is so much more compelling. They could do something like Genesis of the Daleks, where the Doctor goes back and sees this on Mondas.
Well, that's what Spare Parts is.
Right.
The audio drama.
But they could make it into an episode.
Yeah, because that's what they did with Jubilee. They took a lot of that stuff for the Dalek episode. They did that with
Human
Nature. They took it from the book.
And this is significantly less compelling, and I feel like it was seeded to set up the finale, but the finale could just as easily been about Mondas.
Yeah, or if they want to do a parallel universe, it's like
make a new villain.
Yeah, they had an opportunity to make a completely new thing. They didn't have to...
Because I think you could use that origin story with the crazy scientist, have it be something other than Cybermen. That would be a phenomenal episode. Great horror dystopian future story. So...
And then the other thing, this is the thing, I don't know why they did this. This totally pisses me off every time it happens, is now the Cybermen have a catchphrase. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Cybermen never, ever said this before in the history of Doctor Who, but now they scream it every fucking second like a Dalek does with Exterminate. They yell delete. They yell delete at everything, and it's just like, why? Why? Because they're fucking computer people? Is that why they say delete? And that's a key on a computer is delete? So that's what they're going to yell? It's fucking stupid. Why do they yell delete? It's just
we apologize if you have small children and are listening to this.
Fuck them. Fuck them. Fuck the Cybermen from the Revive series. It's.
Do you want me to take over for a second? Let's say what you're gonna say.
Okay,
cool down. All right, cool down. You can come back in a second. I was just gonna say about that catchphrase thing. When I was watching the series 2 for the first time, in a newbie perspective here, that delete thing did weird me out, and they all had the exact same voice, and it was all computerized because I thought, well, these guys are just Dalek clones, and I was assuming. And this was wrong, but I didn't know about the classic series much. I just naturally assumed, with this origin of the Cybermen and how they acted, that in the classic series, that show ran for 26 years. There was probably some point where Daleks were they'd overused, and they probably just made the Cybermen so that they could have humanoid Daleks, and they would have the same thing, but now it's new. Turns out I was totally wrong about that.
Yeah, they're completely different, because the Cybermen, I like that they're always working behind the scenes, or at least in the classic series, they were always working behind the scenes, because there weren't a lot of Cybermen. Their entire race basically was dead. There's only a small handful of Cybermen, basically, and they were trying to clutch onto existence because they couldn't reproduce. They had to capture, like, other things and cyber-convert them into more Cybermen. Right. So there's only a small group of Cybermen at any given time, and so they always had to be very clever about what they were doing. That's what I liked about the Cybermen, is that usually it's like they have no emotions, but they're still insanely intelligent, and they still understand that normal people have emotions, and so they still play on it, even though they don't have emotions themselves.
Right, and so this is what confuses me as a newbie about it, and I know it confuses the hell out of you, or just angers you, flat out, is that if you have a more compelling... Because, see, this is what I was saying, because I was struck that these were just Dalek clones, but humanoid Daleks, and I didn't get the point of that, especially because delete is a very cheesy catchphrase, whereas Daleks exterminate... It's kind of cheesy. It makes sense.
Yeah, it fits a lot more with the Daleks.
Right. Well, because exterminate also is not a button on a keyboard. It makes sense. If you are a militarized race, you would say exterminate. Yeah. Especially because it was playing off of World War II and Cold War fear when they created the Daleks, and that makes sense.
It has almost this, like, exterminate. It has almost this very, like, fascist propagandic feel to it. Yeah. It's exterminate. You're going to kill everything, not just delete. You exterminate.
Right. Delete is cheesier than a lot of the stuff on the classic series.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense.
So what confuses me about that is if you had a better version of it, and it was already there, it's like a gold mine the classic series is giving you, and to turn it into something that feels to a newbie like me, like you are running back to a well of old ideas rather than, being separate, having a new cool villain, which was what they could do if they just, the same way they brought the Daleks back. Bring the Cybermen back, mostly the same, maybe make them even more terrifying. Yeah. This does not make them more terrifying.
It makes them silly.
And this is what I was talking about, earlier in this podcast we said, what makes the episode Dalek so scary is that there's one Dalek. That's what's scary. When there are a million Daleks, they're not scary anymore.
There's like a million fucking Cybermen.
That's my same point. Yeah. In the Age of Steel, they're not as scary when there's that many of them. The fear, and this is what I do like, is the humans getting converted. That's scary, but you could play that the same way with a more authentic origin, I think.
Yeah.
Because the people on Mondas, it sounds like, they were wary of this.
Yeah.
They didn't like that idea.
Yeah, well, because a lot of the episode revolves around the Doctor trying to stop the Cybermen coming to be, and he leads a revolution of the Mondasians, but it ultimately fails.
That would be such a compelling story. And
they had that. They could have gotten the guy who wrote Spare Parts. They could have brought him back, written an episode based on Spare Parts, written a two-parter, and it would have been fantastic. It would have been it would be just as good as Dalek. It would have been one of the best episodes of the new series, but no, they have to fucking recreate entirely the Cybermen, and what didn't happen to me the first time I watched it, because, the first time I watched it, and it got to the part where the Cybermen come out, it's like, what the fuck? Because the Doctor's like, I know what these are. I know who these are. They're the Cybermen. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? No, you don't. Those aren't the fucking Cybermen. No, they're not. You were there when the Cybermen got made. No, these are not the Cybermen. And so the first time I saw it, I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about, Doctor? And then, when I was watching through the Revive series again, and I got to those episodes, I kid you not, I got to the part where the Cybermen come out of the fog, and I hit pause on my Xbox controller. I was like, I can't watch this. I could not watch this, because it just doesn't make sense to me. It would be like it would be like if in the Spider-Man reboot movie, all of a sudden, Spider-Man gets his powers because he goes into space, and he gets hit by cosmic rays, and now he's Spider-Man. You just give him, the Fantastic Four origin, and that's what they do for the new Spider-Man movie. And it's like, I couldn't watch it, because it's not Spider-Man. These are the Cybermen. I can't do it. It was just...
Well, if Stephen Moffat is listening to this podcast, I think it'll be a great opportunity for you, sir, to take the story of Spare Parts, maybe ask that writer to come back, or co-write the episode with him, base it on that or something. It'd be a very compelling story, especially Matt Smith could do a great job with that.
And what I want to see is, I want the bullshit Cybermen from the alternate universe come back for one more time, but in an episode where the actual Cybermen come back, and you bring them back, and they kill all the fake Cybermen. And there has to be a line where the cyber controller guy comes back with the deep voice, that badass Cyberman comes back, and he says to one of the Cybermen, where that Cyberman's like, we are the Cybermen, and he's like, no, you're a pretender. And then he destroys them. That has to happen. It has to happen now, or you can't use the Cybermen anymore. You just can't, because they're not Cybermen.
Okay. I think that's a good place to end the podcast.
Yeah,
but
now that I'm pissed off.
Just so that everyone remembers, we love Doctor Who. This one conversation is not indicative of our feelings about Doctor Who. We love the premiere. We love all the new Doctors. We love all the old Doctors. Except I don't like the Eighth Doctor, but Sean kind of likes the Eighth Doctor. And but not in the movie he's in.
Yeah, well, the movie, shit. I still like Paul McGann.
Yeah, all right. I'm sure he's a nice guy. So we have now talked about Doctor Who for I think 6.5 hours on the Monthly 10 podcast. So high five.
High five.
All right. So and this podcast looks like we're about to set a record for length on the Monthly 10 podcast in about 2.5 hours. So very exciting stuff.
Yes, it is.
So I wish we could talk about Doctor Who every week on here. And I don't know, maybe we'll start a separate podcast for that at some point in the future. But for now, obviously, this has been just a fun thing on the Monthly 10. We kind of did a top 10 list in the month of April over 3 parts. So that's what we've been doing. We really hope everyone enjoyed it. And, if you want to hear more of at least my thoughts on Doctor Who, you can read it over on Your Hub. I'll have reviews of every episode this season. Maybe some other special feature articles. Maybe we can bring Sean on to write some stuff, too. That'll be fun.
Yeah, sure.
Help me with some of these articles. Fun times coming up. And, listen on the Monthly 10, though. If you've just been listening for Doctor Who, we do other stuff here, too, and it should be some fun material in the months to come. We haven't quite picked our topic for May. I'm pretty sure Sean will be here for that one. Probably won't get as angry as he did about the Cybermen thing.
Well, I guess it depends on what you pick. If we do a podcast about Cybermen, then yes, I will.
Okay.
I'm just as angry then as I am now.
I might have to do that as host because that would be a funny fucking episode.
Okay.
And I could show it to a psychiatrist, and they would try to diagnose you. It'd be very weird.
Right now, I'm just thinking about what that Spider-Man movie would be like.
I kind of want to see that.
That'd be weird.
I'd like to go to an alternate reality where that exists and then come back so I never have to see it again.
And with an alternate reality where everyone has eye patches?
Yes, absolutely. Or the Star Trek alternate reality where they all wear mustaches because they're evil. All right, we're getting off topic. So we love Doctor Who. Goodbye. Good luck to the creative team in having a great 6th season. I don't think either of us are in any doubt this is going to be a good year.
Yeah, no. Based on that setup, I'm really. I can't even wait 1 week for the second part. This is bullshit. This is the first time I've had to wait for Doctor. I guess. I mean, there's the wait between Series 5 and Series 6.
But that's not cliffhanger.
Yeah, but it's this is the first cliffhanger where I actually have to sit here and it's I don't get to find out what's happening. Yeah, there's always been more Doctor Who for me to watch.
You'll just have to go into a coma for the next 6 days.
I guess so.
Well, hey, we're going to school this week. That's kind of like being in a coma.
Basically. So, there we go.